We are live. Welcome to the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. I have Insanity is Free from Anarch Unity and Agris Nexus. He's happy, dude. He thinks we're going to definitely defeat the status in the end, and he's definitely optimistic that everything will work out. He likes Sonic comics. And we also have Rose from the LPMC. All right, we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. I know you want to talk about Milei. I wanted to talk about Aaron Bushnell because obviously that's still in the news. It has not died out like people say it would because I'm still seeing posts. There's also the flower massacre that took place today and some other stuff that you wanted to talk about. So kick it off.
So I guess the first thing is that I'll say to piss off everyone is if you support Milei, you hate Aaron Bushnell. Because Aaron Bushnell did his whole martyr thing so that he could spread a message against Zionism. And Javier Milei did a performative woke bullshit thing at the Western Wall and cried with this, I think, rabbi or whatever, statesman, I don't give a shit. He did this dumb performative thing where he cried at that wall, and he said he felt overpowered by emotion, and then he went over and wrote something down. I actually didn't look into that because I don't care. It's probably some legislation. I don't give a shit because whatever Javier Milei supports, with regards to Zionism, should be opposed by the people who also support fucking Aaron Bushnell. And if they don't, then those people are the problem. Those people are the hypocrites who will hijack an issue to say, yeah, free Palestine, we hate Zionism. Wait, but that Zionist wears yellow and black and cosplays as an anarchist.
My issue with him is actually, well, being a vassal of the United States. Because even if someone says they are Jewish or whatever, or they, even if they want to take part in whatever they want to take part in, go visit Jerusalem, whatever. My issue is that adopting the U.S. dollar, not ending the drug war, Patricia Bullrich, the surveillance state is really bad. He did increase taxes. Yeah, he cut some stuff. But I think talking to CPAC leaders is a waste of time. And in addition, if I'm, really going to, put the icing on the cake, I don't think anything good can come from meeting with Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen could be in the next room and say, I will give you money. I will hang out with you. It'd be great. I got a supermodel, next to you. I'll give you a free I'm like, no, I'm not meeting with Janet Yellen. There's no good thing that can come out meeting it. And to me, if you're meeting with Janet Yellen, Bill Clinton, all these people, all these deep state folks, there is a certain point where they just say, well, he's just trying to do what he has to do. At what point do you just say, well, I'm not going to interact with the deep state anymore? It's kind of funny. It's just people made the same argument with Trump. Well, he's just hanging out with Kissinger. Well, he's just, hiring Mike Pompeo. Well, he's just, hiring John Bolton. There's a plan to this. I'm like, I don't really think there is. I think they just told him what he wants to hear. And I really think Yellen and Bill Clinton and all these people and whoever else sees me and just tell him, hey, here's what you want to hear. And he's like, oh, okay. And I'm not really feeling any anti-establishment vibe. See, to me, even if you meet with somebody and the World Economic Forum, as Jeremy pointed out, everybody loves Klaus. So if you're doing all this stuff, even though he went and said some things they don't particularly like, maybe, I don't think that's that big a deal. Because you keep hanging out with these people like this, I start to question, what is your motive? You're hanging out with Klaus, okay, at the World Economic Forum. Then Janet Yellen pops up. Then Trump's there. Then you're hanging out with all these Senator Mark Rubio. Like, this is just one bad person after another.
And the other half of that is, everybody wants to jack off about how his speech was, he told them lefties. But first off, the World Economic Forum is not left-wing. Second off, the ultimate truth is they love to talk about the speech, but they don't like to talk about the end of it, where he said that you are the true protagonists of this story, and Argentina is your staunch and unconditional ally.
It's that wishful thinking again. People like to project whatever traits they want a politician to have onto that politician. And yeah, I mean, I said this when he won. I'm like, okay, I mean, I want to like the guy because, again, he's entertaining, but the fact that he was allowed to win indicates he's probably not an enemy of central banking.
Oh,
Otherwise,
and
we'd be sanctioning the hell out of that country. I mean, if he was even still alive to begin with, he probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have been allowed to win in the first place. If he had, we'd be organizing coups and, yeah. So
I hate to say this, I'm not a fan of BRICS. Everybody knows this. I'm a fan of dropping the U.S. dollar, but I'm not a fan of BRICS. The reason I'm a fan, people say you use U.S. dollars, yes, because I live in America, but I don't think other countries should be indentured to a currency or to anyone else's currency, whether it's the United States, China, or whoever else. It could be any other country. You pick your favorite country. I don't think countries should be indentured to other countries' debt. I don't think that's a good way. I think free trade and sound money is a good idea, or exchange economies. And Aaron from Reeducation makes a good reason how you could abolish money and do stuff with mutual aid. Now, I don't know exactly how that works, but I'd like to see it happen. But another issue I have is he was trying to put a fundraiser, do a thing for Ukraine, and I'm thinking like, what is it? Okay, maybe if someone does some things I don't like, I'm like, okay, fine. It's people just say, okay, he just met with Trump, okay, but then you meet with Trump, then you are trying to fundraise for Ukraine, then you're meeting with Bill Clinton, then you're meeting with Janet Yellen, then you're hanging out with deep staters in the WF, especially supporting Ukraine, to me is the worst one. Maybe even more so than anyone else, because if you're supporting Ukraine, what that tells me is that you're just trying to dump money in something that cannot be won. That every analyst, every military analyst, he says he's friends with the United States. Well, maybe he should watch Colonel Douglas McGregor. Colonel Douglas McGregor is not an anarchist. I don't even think he's right about stuff in the beginning of his career. But it's very evident to me now that it doesn't seem Ukraine has the capabilities to win the war. So what the heck is he doing? Who's he fundraising? Why is he fundraising for this? And why is he sending them stuff? And the whole idea that NATO will get involved if Ukraine loses is ridiculous, because then that drags everybody else in. And that's not a war they can win, because most of NATO is the United States. The good part about this is the way I see that we can win is that I've talked to my other co-host, Leighton. There's a party in Alaska called Joe Vogler, the Alaskan Independence Party. There's Native Hawaiians who, what happened in Hawaii got wrecked, they're mad. There's Southerners who are mad. There's Northerners who are mad. I think we can win if we push for secession, if we win local elections, and we push for balkanization. And while we're doing that, I still agree with Jeremy, drop some knowledge. But you can do both at the same time.
Well, balkanization is not going to be good for the people. People in their present states are like very much antagonistic toward each other, and they aren't unified, and they won't be unified under the branch of balkanization. Balkanization, the whole point of that is that people turn against each other. The whole point of that is that, like, it's referred to like the Balkans, who broke up and had a bunch of violent shit go on. So right now, until people get on board with like even a cohesive concept of what liberty is, that's never going to be a good thing. It's only going to result in people being violent toward each other. So balkanization isn't good. But what would be good is if people were able to get enough people on the same page to build local resistance cells and like mutual aid networks, and instead of trusting the political process, like by supporting people like Milei when they come along and suck your cock enough, we instead do the like practical thing and put our money where our mouths are, direct action, mutual aid, building it the way we should have done for decades.
Yeah, maybe balkanization is not the correct term to use then. I'm thinking more radical decentralization.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
And
The
communities,
idea,
like, yeah, communities that already more or less coexist with each other. Yeah, I know what you mean, but
yeah, the essential idea of what I'm trying to say is, I think we have a path to win. I think and funny enough, if you want to talk about political figures that are good, I think there are political figures that are good that I can name off the top of my head that I do like. Now, they're not perfect. I know you're going to say, like, hey, I saw they said something about wokes or something, anti-woke. But, like, the people I would say who are good, who I've listened to, haven't studied every idea that they've had. A Rick Falkvinia of the Pirate Party in Sweden. He wears an eye patch. He's very pro-Bitcoin. Maxime Bernier. He's a French Canadian of the PPC, People's Party in Canada. He got arrested during COVID and actually stood up for that. There's also Chet Vitlika. I forgot about him, of Liberland. Now, Liberland doesn't have much power. It's a swamp. But I like the idea of Liberland. It's in between Croatia and I think Serbia. That's one. And there's also the Zapatista movement. The Zapatistas have some interesting stuff. There's Chiron. There's a bunch of different things, people that are actually good, real, authentic anarchists that we can work with. So I'm not terribly sad about Milei, but I wish people would say, hey, we have other stuff, other people that we could work with. I don't know if you guys know any of those names I rattled off or have any opinions on them, but I think they're decent.
I used to follow the Pirate Party, though I haven't in a while. I don't know. I think people want to be able to support politicians because it's easier. Okay, I just support this person and then they fix our problems. So yeah, it's just like, the people who think that China's going to bring about socialism and eliminate U.S. hegemony.
I think the U.S.
But
is
no, it's not
eliminating.
happening. Oh, go ahead.
I think the U.S. is actually eliminating their own hegemony. And they're doing it in a really reckless and crazy way. Same with the USSR. But I think what's going to happen is that because the U.S. empires don't last forever, and the EU, again, empires don't last forever. I think there's clear ways to break these things up now, and I think that's what we should move forward.
But don't just move on, though. Like, how is the U.S. destroying its own hegemony? Because no, it's not. That's why Janet Yellen's meeting with Javier Milei.
How is it destroying its own hegemony? Through, in my opinion, debt, having multiple wars, doing the same things the Romans did. They have this issue. They keep fighting over I'm not a fan of borders, but they have the, people fighting over this and that, and very divided. So Hegelian dialectic, everybody's divided. I feel everybody's divided now because the media gets on. It's like, you pick a side, this side, this side. I mean, you got to see it. You got to see that
the hegemony isn't at threat, though, is the point. The hegemony thrives on ordo ab chaos. It always has. Any hegemony needs the people so distracted with each other that they don't consider that the hegemony acts as the interest of the people in the head of the state and not at the people.
But
like, it always operates that way.
And actually, Keith,
go ahead.
I gave Keith a link, and he can give his opinion a little bit better because he's had more experience than me, obviously. But here's the thing: like, whether you liked it or not, maybe you were conservative back then, like around 9/11, everybody was united, my flag, and let's get them. And I go to Afghanistan, and I like George Bush, and I had a beer with George Bush, and we're going to get them in Iraq and country I can't name. And then Toby Keith was up there and cowboy hat and moved to Somalia, and now it's divided. You can't. Okay, look. I'm going off my own experience. You can tell me I'm not. I'm wrong. And welcome, Keith. Pleasure as always. So what I'm saying now is the U.S. Me and Jeremy are debating. I'm saying the hegemony of the America is wearing off because debt, multiple wars, and the biggest thing are people are not united. You bring up anything, the conversations are visceral. It's like, I'm pro this, I'm pro BLM, pro cop. Boom. I'm pro. And to be fair, I'm pro Palestine. I'm pro Israel. And I'm like, the pro Israel, I'm not saying I'm not saying I go fight them, but it's very, very hard to exchange of words. I don't want to be around these pro Zionists. So to me, the hegemony is falling apart because West Virginia, less taxes on guns, get you guns, go crazy country boy. California, don't have any guns. So
the regulations though has like ebb and flow. Like they have to have periods of time where things are marginally freer so that they can use the resulting conflict that they manufacture as a way to justify further legislation and control. They occasionally ease up a little bit on the fucking leash so that when the dog starts attacking people, they can say, man, this breed of dog must be vicious. It's that same shit all the fucking time. It's a ratchet effect, man. They're doing that right now in order to strengthen their hegemony. They're having people like Javier Milei come in and say this is how libertarianism works, so that they can then say, see, if there's any failures in this country at all, that's the fucking result of libertarians. That's the result of anarchy. That's the result of too little of our order. In V for Vendetta, there was a great line where that fucking guy's on that giant fucking TV, very 1984 Big Brother-esque, and he says, let us remind them why they need us. It's that.
So, are we talking about like national unity though? Because I agree with Kareem that there used to be a much stronger sense of unity. Like, of course, there was always a divide. There was Team Red, there was Team Blue, but they used to at least be able to, have political conversations. Like, I remember when I was growing up, my parents, like every election night, they were, hardcore Democrats. They would get together with their Republican friends and they'd have, a lighthearted evening of, debating and gloating when, one family's candidate won over the other. People don't really do that anymore. Now they view the other side or the other team as, some kind of existential threat. But if you support Team Red, you're actually a threat to my ability to exist.
But the elites love that shit.
Of course they want us divided, but
well, there are factions
it's the balancing act, though. They can only have just so much division before, you end up with civil war or you end up with secession or balkanization.
Which they would not mind because you are the carbon they want to reduce.
Well, there are divisions within the ruling class as well. One of the reasons we see so much political conflict right now is because there's a lot of division within the ruling class itself. And it comes down to a number of different issues. Like you have the multilateralist wing of the ruling class that tends to be very oriented towards international institutions like the United Nations, for example, or NATO and all that kind of stuff. That's why a lot of them now are waxing hysterical about the idea that Donald Trump might somehow undermine NATO or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the unilateralists, and they tend to be more within the Jacksonian tradition. Like you could say the multilateralists, if you trace their roots back far enough, they go back to the Hamiltonian imperialist tradition. But then the unilateralists tend to be more like Jacksonian nationalists, and these were the people that were always about aggressive westward expansion, and then the open door into Asia and that kind of stuff. What they used to call the open door, which was basically forcing trade routes open in the in the Pacific and in East Asia. That's why those people today are the China hawks. Like the multilateralists tend to be the Russia hawks. They think everything is a Russia conspiracy nowadays. The other side, the unilateralists tend to be China hawks, and they've always been much more Asian centric, more Pacific centered. And then some of that is geographical too. The first group tends to be more the upper levels of the ruling class. It's the traditional Northeastern establishment that goes all the way back to the colonial period. And then you have the Sun Belt, or the Western states, not the traditional South, but the South was absorbed into the Sun Belt. And then you have the Western states, and they tend to be the ones that are more unilateralist and more nationalistic. Like someone like Steve Bannon represents that point of view. He's sort of an extreme version of that point of view. But Republicans generally tend to be more in that genre. And that's another division. Somebody was talking about degrowth. That's another big thing, and that is how to deal with climate issues, because the upper levels of capital are the ones that are for the degrowth agenda. They're Malthusians. They've always been Malthusians, long before the climate issue became a thing. Like, that's one reason why they always pushed Planned Parenthood aggressively. It's a means of population reduction. Like, I mean, regardless of what you think about abortion as an issue, I mean, the reason they were always aggressively pro-abortion is for that reason.
But there's one thing I never understood, because it doesn't make sense to me. There's some people like in the upper class of, I guess, the Jacksonian or the China, or not the China Hawks, the Russian Hawks. It's interesting to me in the ruling class, because there's people like Greta Thunberg. There are some internationalists, globalists, whatever you want to call them, that seem to be pro-Palestine, but I don't really, and against Israel. I don't know, is that like some guilt type thing, because they're not good people. Like I'm talking about the UN, bourgeois types that seem to be pro-Palestine. Is that just to be contrarian?
But that's my point.
Yeah.
That's my point. I was saying that they love division. She keeps them divided in any sort of context she's involved in. So they love division. It strengthens the hegemony because we are too weak to fight them, and they get to continue to spread their influence. That's all it is. The hegemony is stronger than ever. They've got more members of NATO. They've got Sweden coming up. They got Argentina bellying up to the trough. It's all coming together much stronger than it ever has been, and that's the reason Argentina is talking about Ukraine, Israel, all these fucking globalists, because they're on board now. Because that's what shock doctrine is. Naomi Klein wrote a great book. Read it.
So wait, you think Greta Thunberg coming out as, a supporter of Palestine, you think that's, deliberate, or you think she finally outgrew the,
Con op. I think that if she actually gave a shit, she would actually oppose some of these very specific corporations involved in Palestine, instead of continuing her fucking gigantic fucking circle jerk that she's constantly involved in, where she just repeats some slogan or says something shallow and fucking vapid, and then nothing like, oh, there can be no fucking blah blah, when the blah, it doesn't matter. Just say what actually, go against a corporation, go against the banks, go against NATO, say something strong, shut the fuck up if you're not going to, because you're controlled opposition. That's my take on Greta.
I would maybe she outgrew, the being a puppet for special interest groups bullshit.
Maybe.
She's only
that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's that conspiratorial. Greta Thunberg comes from a family of millionaires in Sweden.
Yeah.
But that's, being a millionaire is really like maybe the middle of the upper middle class. Like somebody that has a 6-figure income is upper middle class, and then the middle of the lower upper middle class, and then the middle of the upper middle classes are millionaires, and then the publicly visible billionaires like Bezos and Oprah Winfrey and Trump. That's like the upper level of the upper middle class. But the ruling class proper are people whose wealth and power can't be measured in personal assets. These are family dynasties that go back for centuries. In the U.S., it would be these old bourgeois families. The Morgans, Rockefellers, Mellons, all of that kind of stuff. And then in Europe, it's the families associated with the Saxe-Coburg Gotha dynasty, and then the Vatican, and then the traditional royalty and aristocracy, as well as their version of the Rockefellers, the industrial bourgeoisie families. And then worldwide, you have the oil sheiks like the House of Saud. They're probably trillionaires. And you have
hashtag Anglo-American establishment.
Yeah, and then even the CCP now probably controls enough wealth to be a major partner in the international ruling class. But someone like Greta Thunberg is really just like, if you want to compare it to feudal times, she's just sort of a mid-level princess or something, just like a little fiefdom. And virtue signaling has always been a big thing with people like that. It's always a big thing, even in ancient and medieval times, for the layers, these mid-level layers within the aristocracy to pretend to be friends of the peasants. It's the same thing. Like our version of that are Hollywood celebrities and people like that. That's why those people are always pretending to, they're always virtue signaling about how they're pro the environment, or they're pro animal rights, or they're pro Black Lives Matter. Whatever the end thing is, And then you've got conservative versions of that, like you've got John Voight or somebody like that. But those people aren't the ruling class. That's so they're just celebrities, really.
Yeah, I think the ruling class is people. Well, I've divided it into different things. I would definitely say like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. People like that.
Yeah,
the
right.
The Rothschild family is definitely like the Rothschild. Like the videos finally came up. It's ironic. I guess the universe works in interesting ways. That Rothschild died right as this Israel stuff is going on, so people can look. Oh, what was the Balfour Declaration? Who was on that? Oh. Because my dad told me, Korea was made by the Balfour Declaration. So I looked up Balfour Declaration. I'm like, I see who's it addressed to? Lord Rothschild from Balfour.
Kinda, but the Balfour Declaration was not the first thing. Sykes-Picot and the pushing of the Ottomans was, and the promise of Palestinian independence which was eventually like reneged on. That's what the original thing was. The Balfour Declaration came later.
Okay. I mean, my understanding is because of pogroms in Europe, a guy named Sabbatai Zebi was the first guy who came up. Well, maybe we should have our own way to defend ourselves, and we'll call it Zionism. And they're like, yeah, that should work in Europe. And then they did work for the Ottomans for a while. Then they got kicked out. Then they had the issue, and I'm paraphrasing here. And then, yes, some of them started to return. And of course, the British, in my opinion, are the ones who caused the biggest problem because they promised a whole bunch of people a whole bunch of things, and then they couldn't deliver. And that, to me, is just what an empire does.
Which was Sykes-Picot and the McMahon-Hussein correspondence.
Yeah, well, the founder of Zionism, of modern Zionism, was Theodor Herzl. There were prototypes for it before that. But the Zionists were hugely influential in Britain, which is why Britain eventually issued the Balfour Declaration. The Zionists in Britain also used their relationship with American Zionists to push the Wilson administration to enter World War I on behalf of Britain, in part because they wanted to destroy the Ottoman Empire so they could establish a Zionist homeland in Palestine. That wasn't the only reason the Americans entered World War I, but that was part of it.
Yeah, it seems to me a lot of these events, which were just like, this has happened since World War I, World War II. There's even maybe I could say, throw a conspiracy that the international bankers, really going to throw this out there, the international bankers bankrolled Stalin, bankrolled Hitler, bankrolled all these insane, National Socialists and fascists. Yes, so they could fight each other, but so they could make Europe uninhabitable for people to say, hey, you're not safe here anymore. Because you're not safe here anymore, look what these guys did. Oh, did you fund them? Maybe. Oh, no, we didn't fund them. And the people who I understand, according to he's dead, but a conspiracy theorist named Jim Mars from Texas, is that the Warburg family helped fund Lenin. And obviously, it's well known the Bush family funded the National Socialists.
Well, not just the Bush family, but also the Rockefellers, the Chase Institutes, like fucking like every major Western backer. Like, and Hitler learned everything he knew from America. So, like, the ultimate truth there is that they created that enemy so that they could create like justification for establishment of the hashtag Anglo-American establishment, and a bunch of shit came out of that eventually resulted in like the Nakba and the pushing out of fucking like every family from their homes in the region until like they eventually like had the 6-Day War, which was a series of massacres and a bunch of shit like that. And like, people want to forget about all this. They want to pretend that it started on October 7th. But it didn't. It started way back then, and the Nakba and the 6-Day War were a natural consequence of the like meddling over there. And that's why Biden says, like, because it's a regional foothold, it's nothing more than a glorified American like police, troops, etc., weapons storage base. Like, Israel is the world's largest American military base. Like the reason they have it that way is because like they could just justify whatever fucking tensions they raise in the Middle East, and they've got this weapons stockpile over there. They've got this strategic ally over there. They've got this. And that's why Biden said that if we didn't have an Israel, we would make one. Because
Correct.
like if but so like that's the thing. That's the reason I'm saying the hegemony is stronger than ever, because there are more people on board with Israel despite what they're doing than ever, including Javier Milei, who's also on board with Ukraine. And when like the shit in Israel was starting, I got some flack for saying that, you know, Israel is more comparable to Ukraine than it is Russia. And like people didn't like that. But now you're starting to see that the strategic allies of both parties are the same. And the people who back Russia are very similar to the people on the side of Palestine, because that's where the real lines are.
Mhm.
And like they like to keep this sort of stuff occluded. They like to keep people pretending that this isn't the case, so that they can make it seem like there's some existential threat to hegemony, but it's not. Like Israel and Ukraine were vassal states. The U.S. has been funding Ukrainian nationalists and Israeli nationalists since the end of World War II, and through the Cold War and into the War on Terror and all this other shit. And it's nothing new. The hegemony is stronger than ever and getting more strategic allies than it's ever had before. And it's not weaker just because they're keeping the proles fighting. That's in fact part of their strength, because we're too busy fighting each other to actually weaken the hegemony.
Okay, I'd say
Isn't it-
Taiwan is one too. Correct? Would you argue Taiwan is also a vassal state?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, they wouldn't even exist without the United States.
Mhm.
They would have been re-annexed by the PRC a long time ago.
Yeah. Sorry, Rose.
Oh, no problem. No, I was just going back to the hegemony thing, because we were talking about that previously. Like, doesn't it feel like U.S. rulers' time preference is getting higher and higher, though? Like, it feels like everyone is trying to extract as much, wealth and resources as they can, because, I don't know,
because they can get away with it, and because the media
yes, but
and because the media cycle is so bombarding these days that most people are going to forget about the last scandal when the next scandal crops up in 2 weeks.
okay.
Well, I do think that there is a fracturing in the global ruling class in a way that's not necessarily beneficial to the American ruling class. I mean, I do think you see other factions within the global ruling class that are asserting themselves more aggressively and becoming more influential. China is an obvious example. Like China has now more or less has economic parity with the United States. It's not nearly the same kind of military power, but although it's certainly rising as an Asian power, the Russians are becoming more aggressive internationally, obviously. Although within the ranks of the international ruling class, I think the Russians are overrated. Like the Russians are to the international ruling class what the mafia is to the American ruling class. It's like, yeah, they're there, but I mean, they're sort of they're considered rogues within their own class. Europe has economic parity with the United States as well, but the United States and Britain still managed to exercise a great deal of dominance over Europe. Like one of you I think Jeremy was talking about Milei. Milei is just another Latin American neoliberal IMF puppet. I mean, guys like that are a dime a dozen. And in like 35, 40 years, I've been watching Latin American politics. I've seen hundreds of guys like that come and go. I mean, he's maybe more flamboyant. He looks like some 70s porn producer or something. But I mean, there's a ton of people like that. I mean, Latin America is the entire, center right in Latin America is basically carbon copies of Milei to varying degrees. A few years ago, there was some supposed libertarian female president or candidate, I think in Honduras or one of those places. She's the same way. She's like a female Milei.
What about I was going to ask about I always pronounce his name Jair Bolsonaro or something. He seems like to be your typical, fascist or whatever. I'm not a fan of Lula, but everyone's like, oh, Bolsonaro's against the establishment. I'm like, exactly how is he against the establishment? They're like,
well, he represents the right wing. He represents a right-wing nationalist wing of the Brazilian ruling class. Now, it is true that he is a little, well, Brazil generally, but Brazil itself tries to work the middle between the East and the West. Like they're a part of the BRICS. That's where the B in the BRICS comes from, Brazil. All right. So but so they've always tried to, well, not always, but in recent years, they've tried to work, last couple of decades, they've tried to work both ends against the Middle East and West. And then even within the Brazilian ruling class, you see that, like regardless if it's a right-wing president like Bolsonaro or a left-wing one like Lula right now, they take the same basic approach to foreign policy. They're always trying to straddle the fence between the East and the West. Lula's a little bit more East-leaning. Bolsonaro was a little bigger on trying to maintain friendly relationships with the United States, but that's where they are, though. They're sort of in the middle between the two.
Right. Now, I guess my point was, these politicians used to seem, of course they were all corrupt as hell, but it seemed like they were at least thinking a few steps ahead. Now, their decisions are seemingly, nonsensical. It's just all about how much they can grab out of the system before it collapses. So I don't know.
Or maybe that's why
like
it makes
Rome in the last
sense.
few centuries.
Sorry, what?
I said it's like Rome in the last few centuries of the empire. That's how that was.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm thinking.
You had each new wave of emperors, each new family dynasty was crazier than the one before.
Yeah.
You had one guy that was appointing his horse to the Roman Senate and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, empires usually last a couple hundred years. I mean, yeah, it's.
Well, Rome went through multiple permutations. Like Rome lasted about 1200 years. But if you want to look at the American Empire, you could argue that America is like Rome in that it's really a permutation of Britain, because the history of Rome is like the three major periods with the monarchy, the republic, and the empire, and collectively all of that lasted about 1200 years. And the Anglo-Saxon Empire goes back to, if you want, you can trace it all the way back to 1066 if you want, the Norman conquest. But you have the rise of Britain as a hegemonic sea power in the Middle Ages and early modern period. And then, going up to about now, it's about 1,000 years later, and that's about how long Rome lasted. So we're on schedule.
Well, but that's the other half of it, is that you can say that it's acting like a failing empire, but here's the thing. If the empire is breaking over for a globalist transition period, then they would have all the incentive necessary to grab what they can right before the end of this current iteration, so that they can have as many material resources and as much power for the next iteration as possible, which is, hashtag Great Reset, hashtag Agenda 20 something or other, hashtag, fucking Project for a New American Century, hashtag all of these things that fucking they've been planning for a while. The sheer amount of projects that they've been public about that people call me insane for saying are happening, like ID 2020 and etc. They know exactly what they're doing. They're trashing this old system because it's less efficient at tyranny than the new system they're putting in.
No, so it's controlled demolition of the U.S. dollar.
Mm-hmm. Sort of like the controlled demolition of, the World Trade Centers.
That too.
Well, I think what that points to, though, is that the global ruling class is fracturing into multiple poles. I tend to agree with that, in the sense that it's getting to be what the direction it's moving in. I think you can disagree as to how far it's gone in this direction, but the direction it's moving in seems to be about like 1900. Like, most people today are used to living in either a unipolar world or a bipolar world. But back when we had a multipolar world, like about 100 years ago, you had back then, America was a lot like what the UN, not the UN, the EU is now. It was a continental economic power, but it didn't really have a global military reach. Whereas America is like what the British Empire used to be. It's like the largest player on the field, but not the only player. And China is becoming like what the French used to be. Like, they were, African colonialism is really what made the French Empire. African and Southeast Asian And that's kind of what China is today. And then you see the Turks rising again. Like the Turks arguably have the most formidable army in the world today. You know, I think if the United States had to really fight Turkey, the United States would be destroyed. And then you see these other rising Asian powers: Saudi Arabia, Iran, Indonesia, India. You know, they're becoming like the old colonial European empires used to be. And then Russia. Russia's still what it was back during the Tsars era. It's just this regional hegemon in Eurasia. So we're kind of going back to the year 1900, but I think the different factions of the global ruling class know that, and they're trying to carve out their own turf for themselves. It's kind of like, let's say for a long time, you had like a hegemonic mafia family controlling, you know, rackets in New York City or whatever. And then for whatever reason, the all of those networks of alliances started to fragment and different mafia families start splitting, and then they start trying to carve out their own territory and their own racket systems in the process. That's kind of what's happening now. Like you see that with this Great Reset thing. What that is like I mentioned earlier, the upper levels of capital and the multilateralists, they're the ones that are behind the Great Reset. Whereas I've heard some people on the left talk about this Project 2025 thing that the conservative side has come up with. Well, that's like the unilateralists. That's like the ones that are Asian oriented, that are behind that. So all of these represent these ruling class factions that are trying to gain hegemony within all these different realms, because there's something of a scramble going on now.
I actually have a question about the country you brought up, because that's the hardest one. Funny enough, my ethnicity is Egyptian and Turkish, and Turkey has always been kind of a wild card for me. They're in a bunch of different things, like the OIC. From my understanding, they're in NATO. I think they're friendly with BRICS countries. And yes, I think they do have one of I think you could argue, Colonel Douglas McGregor has said, and I was shocked to hear, that Turkey does have the best military, maybe in the world. So, but it's not really clear what Erdogan's goals are, whose side they're on, or what they're doing. Like,
well, he's a neo-Ottoman. He wants to restore Turkey to what it had during the Ottoman era, where it was like the dominant power in West Asia, or the Middle East. And he works both ends as well. I mean, he works the West and the East. You know, he's not really firmly in either camp. I mean, Turkey is actually a NATO member, but then they're on more friendly territory with the Asian powers than the bulk of the West is. So he's working both ends there as well. But Erdogan is a lot like Trump. I mean, he's a lot smarter than Trump, but he's someone that's, you know, an aggressive nationalist who cultivates the political, you know, Turkey's equivalent of the political right, like the religious right and all that as his base, even though that's not really his orientation. He's not some kind of Islamist with a religious agenda, but he plays to some of that as a you know, just as a base, just like Trump does with the evangelical Christians. But yeah, Turkey's a rising power, though. Turkey is a very formidable power. They're probably the best military power certainly in Asia. You know, it's I don't. They have to go up against the Russians. That would be a pretty mammoth fight, I think. But I tell you, if Turkey ever says they've had enough of Israel, then Israel's in real trouble.
So, just to be clear, there's this meme going around that's very true. If fucking Tom kills Jerry, the show ends. The state will always, literally never not, need enemies.
Mm-hmm.
The more dramatically they can build up the enemies, the more they can make them appear as though they're a significant threat, or the more legitimate threats that they can have, the more power they can extract from the common person at the common person's expense. When it comes down to it, the rally around the flag effect of 9/11 really showed what I'm talking about. They divided the people against Middle Eastern terrorists, and anybody who disagreed with the fucking consensus was a terrorist sympathizer. So anybody who potentially had the wrong opinions could be monitored more. Patriot Act, NSA, fucking all the stuff that Snowden revealed, Vault 7, like the FISA bullshit that they exposed, like all this stuff is the direct result of having a scary enough foreign threat. And what I mean, like, why I'm bringing that up is because, like, if you don't have, for instance, a Turkey out there that you say, well, this has a much stronger military than we do, you can't justify continually building your military. If you don't have an Israel, in some of these people's minds, that is like representative of an overwhelming, overarching power structure, you can't justify the upswell of support for the side that doesn't support them. If you don't have a Palestine that is rife with evil terrorists and backward religions and blah blah, oppressive, etc., backed by those evil people in Iran who are trying to enrich nuclear blah blah, if you don't have that, you can't have these two groups invested enough in the conflict, either pro or anti-Palestine, either pro or anti-Israel. You can't have them invested enough in the conflict to take a side, invest their energy into it, and therefore support one side of American hegemony, which takes one of those positions. But they both fundamentally end up on the same power axis. They both fundamentally end up doing the same thing for capital. And the third parties are basically third positionists in that they're fascists, just like the third positionists were. Like the basic truth here is that when you get to like the end run of politics, you need people to hate each other, and whether that be each other at the home country or each other being them and a foreign threat. If you don't have the people hating each other, they might have enough simpatico to fight you. So you've got to keep them asleep, keep them suspended. Fucking like that speech from They Live. Like, you've got to keep them fighting each other. You've got to keep them on your prescribed notions. And like, this is the exact thing. It's like what David Icke brought up. It's problem, reaction, solution. You create the problem. You know exactly what the reaction to the problem is going to be, and then you offer a pre-manufactured solution to the problem. It's that with Israel, it's that with Ukraine, it's that with gun control, it's that with abortion, it's that with all these lynch issues that they're bringing up. And the two major parties take different positions on that, but they don't really take different positions, and in the end run they're going to serve the same masters, be paid by the same checks, and do the same shit. So the elites still get what they want. The elites have people pouring their time, effort, money, and energy into one end of the duopoly or the other, or a third party that will likely not win. And because of that, the elites are going to consistently have all of this energy fed into their system and not against it. And as a result of that, the elites are going to grow a stronger hegemony than ever, because the people think they're fighting the system by fighting the guy down the street or across the way from their house or in a neighboring state that doesn't think like we do, or fucking halfway across the world or the country or the whatever. Keep people attacking each other. Keep people thinking that guy on Twitter is the enemy. Keep people thinking that guy on TikTok who posted that bad stitch is the enemy. Keep like the attention span decreasing, and then appeal to that attention span that you have then decreased by hammering just more and more and more and more and more to hate only one side of this manufactured duopoly with. And eventually people will be like balkanized against each other enough that as long as they're still supporting people who are fundamentally on the same page, when those people do what the elites want, their power grows. That's how it has always been. That's how it will always be. 9/11 is an example of it, because like they got people on board against the scary brown person. Vietnam was an example of it, because they got the people on board with the scary yellow person. The groomer thing with LGBT now, where, oh, we're protecting kids. No, you're not. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing as like the Black Menace and the, he touched that white woman, hang him. all this shit is all the same. The Stonewall riots in sorry, not in the 80s, in the civil rights movement, right? The fucking, like, Stonewall was a riot. LGBT people should stand up for themselves, but they should also recognize when they're being played against their common person, and when their common person is being played against them. That's real unity. That's when you get something like the Rainbow Coalition together, with people realizing, if we can get these people to drop supremacy, maybe we can get some traction.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. It's interesting because I do see fractures. Maybe I could be persuaded it could go both ways. But, just recently what happened with Aaron Bushnell, people are discussing, like, oh, was it mentally ill? Was it this? Was it that? So I'm going to wait and see if any information comes out.
He wasn't.
And it turns out,
if you see what he was posting on the internet, like, he was clearly lucid. I don't think he was mentally ill.
no. I think he had classified information.
Possible.
Decided, hey, I have classified information. Based on that classified information, I saw something, that he saw some, stuff. He heard some stuff.
Yeah.
He didn't want to spend, maybe he didn't want to get detained. So that's what he did. And I think people said it didn't do anything. Now, the interesting thing I say is stuff takes time, just like the monks in Vietnam who protested. I think it's creating a ripple effect. Even I'm going to a march tomorrow. But what I think it's showing is, maybe even if their hegemony is stronger, I still think we can break it, because there is a divide, maybe not among the ruling class, but among regular people about the ruling class.
Sure, there's a divide, but that divide is ever stronger in favor of one pre-manufactured element of the ruling class. And that's the reason that, like, a lot of these Milei supporters will say, oh yeah, I don't like fucking globalism and Zionism and all these stuff and the shit leftists and collectivism and blah blah. And then you bring up that he's all of that, and the only thing he's not is a leftist. And that really doesn't work well with them, so they stick with their cognitive dissonance. And the Libertarian Party will continually spam images supporting him on the Twitter account. The Libertarian Party Mises Caucus will block any posts about his misdeeds in their group. The people involved in the official libertarian shit and the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus will not talk about it at all, except to suck his cock for the most part. There's some good people in it. I'm not saying they're all bad, but
I would hope not.
But like that, what I'm saying is, like, the general overarching current is most people are going to latch on. Most people are going to pretend that their like tiny band of alleged resistance isn't part of the problem, isn't part of the program. It definitely is. Maybe someday, if we can get enough people on board with actually looking at the facts, that'd be a thing. But like even the people in the alleged resistant camp are so often the TLDR crowd, where these people will say that, oh, you spammed me an essay, bitch, it's a paragraph. You didn't do the format I liked, so I'm gonna fucking ignore what you're saying. Or you didn't do the format I liked, but you did the format they liked, or whatever the thing is. I'm not bitter at all.
Well, that's just a cope, because they can't actually respond to what you're saying.
Yeah, and like, that's the thing. These people can be so easily bought because, like, they don't want to look into this. Like, I talked about, for instance, on one of these streams, I talked about, or actually it was Leighton's stream, I talked about how Javier Milei was going to violently suppress protests using militarized police. And they said I was wrong. I was reading from his platform.
Yep.
Right? And if they
Right.
had read his fucking platform instead of just sucking him off because of what the media told them, and their favorite fucking libertarian jackoffs told them, it would have been different. They would have known I was right. But they would rather suck off this fucking
again,
guy who they think is their men on the inside.
They want to project their own, ideas onto this guy. Oh, I'm not going to arrest protesters, so therefore this guy who I happen to like, clearly he doesn't want to either. Again,
Well,
it's thinking.
You see that with all of these so-called within the system opposition parties and political figures. Like Milei is just the latest example, but you see that from a lot of different angles. Like another one recently that a lot of the alt-right people fell for was Giorgia Meloni in Italy. I mean,
Fascist.
what she is just another Euro neoliberal. You know, it's like the fascist types. I mean, the ones that actually take fascism seriously were saying, "Well, yeah, we've got one of ours now. Mussolini's back," and no, she's just another Euro neoliberal. And the same thing is true with the ascendancy of the Green Party in Germany. You know, they were supposed to be these leftist revolutionaries, and then actually one of them got appointed defense minister of Germany, and she was a more hawkish defense minister than the right-wing German defense ministers typically are. So all of these people are controlled opposition. You know, it's the same way here. I mean, you have like okay, Obama, first black president. Oh, black guy, must be cool, right? Yeah, right. Whatever. Someone like Bernie Sanders, the way they work that guy is really interesting because it's like on one hand, they keep him at enough of a distance that he doesn't get close to real power, but then they keep working him as this controlled opposition. I mean, he's totally bought into the military-industrial complex and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You know, it's he's totally bought into the Israel lobby, all of that kind of stuff. But
me really that they like the media at this time. I'm like, there's no way you could convince me like that. There's certain points it's just like, hey, Michael Jackson's brutal death metal. I'm like, you're out of your mind. I remember reading about Emmanuel Macron being a former Rothschild banker. They're like, he's an outsider. I'm like, he's a Rothschild banker.
Steve Bannon, he's Goldman Sachs. You know, yeah.
Or hey, fuckers, libertarians, if you're still on board with this stream, yeah, like so. When we're talking about establishment shills, Peter Thiel, he is on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. He's on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. He has helped Palantir, and the U.S. intelligence and military industrial complex. He has helped fund Facebook so that it can become a tool of the CIA and other tools of other forms of U.S. intelligence, military, etc. He is on board with several military projects, including several things affiliated with Eric Schmidt. He is a military industrialist, and he consistently also hyper funds warhawk Republicans and evil pieces of shit. But he says he's a libertarian, so you'll get a lot of libertarians saying, this guy's one of us. He says, I don't like socialism. Fuck you, piece of shit. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Well, Peter Thiel actually has
libertarians not enough. Like, I need you to elaborate on what you mean by libertarian.
They usually don't mean much.
Okay.
Peter Thiel actually is one of the bankrollers of this movement called national conservatism, which is kind of like Trumpism without Trump. It's like neocons basically that want to co-opt Trumpism for their own side, and they don't like Trump. They think he's too much of a loose cannon, or not a team player or whatever. So they created this thing called national conservatism, and the intellectual leader of it is a guy named Yoram Hazani. He's like a protege of Irving Kristol, so he comes straight from neocon royalty, right? And this guy's like the intellectual leader, and Peter Thiel funds this movement, right? So, and then they were big on pushing DeSantis's candidacy. Like they were hoping they could cultivate Ron DeSantis as sort of like a non-Trump Trump that would be puppet mastered by the neocons. Mm-hmm. And now that DeSantis hasn't floated very well, they're trying to do the same with Nikki Haley. She's like there.
Yes, she's clearly there because the establishment wants her there.
Yeah,
it's inevitable. She's going to be.
Well, the reason that she stays in the campaign, the reason she hasn't dropped out is because the plan with her is that they're hoping the anti-Trump Republicans.
Yeah, they're going to disqualify him from running.
Yeah, they're hoping they can push them out and then appoint her as the replacement. That's just an intro Republican clash there.
It's interesting to see that at least the neocon ruling class is starting to, in my opinion, fit. Like Mitch McConnell's gone. A lot of these people don't trust neocons, even the ones that try to be hip and cool, like Dan Crenshaw. People are starting to see through that. I'm hoping being a neocon is frankly a thing of the past, and then most of them either are shunned, and then a lot of them are older, so they just go and die out and whatever like that.
I thought it was. I honestly like when the Trump type Republicans, or when the Trumpers took over the Republican Party, I thought neocons, well, most of them either moved to the Democrat Party, or they kind of had fallen out of favor, and now the party was being run by right-wing populists. But they've definitely made a resurgence. All it took was the October 7th attacks, and suddenly they're back out in force.
Yeah, neocons are more entrenched in the establishment now than they've ever been. What happened with that is, like Rose said, when Trump came in, what they did was they worked an all-front strategy of trying to. Some of them went to the Democrat, and basically took over the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. That's why you see all these lifelong Reaganites like John Bolton and George Will on MSNBC all of a sudden, Bill Kristol and people like that. So that was part of what they did. Then they also built the Never Trump wing of the Republican Party. All right. Then you had still others that were trying to embed themselves in Trumpism and trying to bend Trumpism in their direction. And then you had
he turned out to be too much of a wild card, I think.
And then they had others that created this national conservatism thing, which is like sort of just a controlled opposition. That's Trumpism without Trump.
Mike Pompeo seemed to be a neocon to me. Would you classify Mike Pompeo as a neocon?
No, the term neocon is both overused too broadly and too narrowly. Neocons are something more narrow than just conservatism in a broad sense. What Mike Pompeo is just an old school, Reaganite super hawk. I mean, he's like George. He's like the Cheneys, or he's like John Bolton.
He's just a con. Like, there's no neo about him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, all these people are scam artists, but there's a difference between neocons and these super hawks. Like the super hawks come out of the Goldwater Reagan movement of the Republican Party. The neocons came out of the left originally. They started out as Democrats and moved to the Republicans, and now some of them are going back to the Democrats. Like the Kagans are neocons. They've always been Democrats. That's Victoria Nuland's husband, Robert Kagan, and then his family, the Kagans. They're like neocon royalty. They're like the Crystals and Butthoritzes and all that, but they've always worked the Democrat angle. Like Paul Gottfried, who's like a leading intellectual historian, a paleocon, he knew a lot of these people back in the 60s and 70s, and he said once that he told me that in 1972, when the neocon movement was first getting organized, they intentionally split themselves up into two factions, where one was going to support George McGovern for the presidency, and the other faction was going to support Nixon. That way they win either way, and then they have a foot in the door as far as appointments and think tanks and cabinet positions and being put into the bureaucracy of the State Department and all that. So either way they win, and that's how they've always worked. The neocons have always worked multiple angles simultaneously.
And like, just to be clear, like I'll make this short. Just to be clear, though, Democrats aren't the left, so they didn't come from the left. They just came from another wing of the authoritarian right.
Well, no, the original neocons came from the left. Some of them were originally Trotskyites.
I was going to ask, is there any truth to that Trotskyites became neocons?
Yes.
Okay.
Back when the Trotskyite movement was a real thing and Trotsky was still alive, one of the leaders of American Trotskyism was a guy named Max Shachtman. Mm-hmm. Right? And then over time, Shachtman started becoming what you might call a right-wing Trotskyite. And what that meant is he became anti-Soviet on Trotskyite grounds, rooted in the historic rivalry between Trotsky and Stalin. So anti-Stalinist Trotskyite. And then the neocons, the Shachtmanites started becoming increasingly pro-American imperialism on anti-Stalinist grounds. And then you had the followers of Shachtman. They created a party back in the 1960s called Social Democrats USA. And this was a social democratic party similar to something like DSA, only it was super hawkish on foreign policy. And it was also had CIA connections. Parallel to that was attended an organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Congress for Cultural Freedom was a leftist anti-Soviet organization. It was created back in the 1950s, and it was also funded by the CIA. One of the directors of that was Irving Kristol, who was one of the founders. I think he's the guy that really founded the term neoconservatism, as or started calling his movement neoconservatism. So yeah, and then also Norman Podhoretz, he was one of the other founders of neoconservatism, and he was a former editor of what Commentary magazine is still around today, and now it's just a neocon magazine. But back in the 50s, it was a New Left magazine, and Podhoretz and Kristol and some of these other people and the Shachtmanites, they started moving away from the left, away from Trotskyites and social democracy and all that kind of stuff, and towards the hawkish wing of the Democratic Party. Like it used to be, you had in the Democrats, you had hardcore Cold War liberals like Scoop Jackson and people like that. They started moving towards those guys, and there were two reasons for that. They were very anti-Russian on anti-Stalinist grounds, and maybe some other issues as well. And they were also very pro-Israel because most of these people were Jewish. I mean, like 95% of these people were Jewish. So on pro-Zionist and anti-Soviet grounds, they started moving towards pro-Western, hawkish, pro-imperialist positions. And they broke with the New Left over this stuff because the New Left was more pro-Third World, pro-Palestinian. They tended to be anti-Soviet, but pro-Viet Cong and pro-Maoism and that kind of stuff. So that was the real source of the split. That's why the neocons started moving to the Republicans, because they figured, okay, we want to be aligned with the pro-Israel side. We want to be aligned with the pro-U.S. imperialism side. So, and then plus they wanted right-wing capitalists to give them money for their foundations and that kind of stuff too. So that's how the neocons became.
And that what I was saying is that when they were in the Democrat Party, I don't qualify that as coming from the left. Like before they joined that, sure, but the Democrat Party has always been a wing of the authoritarian right party, and they eventually came full right because of that. Like they eventually gave up the ghost of saying we're leftists and just called themselves a former conservative, because that's what they always were the second they joined the opposition to the left.
Right. Well, even today there are a lot of paleocon types who consider them to be leftists. I know a lot of anti-neocon, paleocon types who are veterans of those conflicts, and they still talk about that shit. How that back in the day when they had the paleocon neocon rivalries, and they considered the neocons to be these leftist Jacobin infiltrators, right? Which from their vantage point they are. All of this stuff is relative. It's just like
the influencer. Funny enough, I know Jeremy didn't like this, and even he commented, but there's an influencer I liked back in the day. Don't like him anymore. Who had a movement called with the frogs called the Groypers, and I guess he would be, or Stu Peters. I would consider those kind of like the paleocons. They're like, we're America, we love America, but all you got is grifters.
And Stu Peters and fucking Nick Fuentes are just fascists. They've never been conservatives.
Weren't they?
Nick Fuentes is a Nazi.
Well, they call themselves paleocons. Weren't they at one point, or were they always just using that term? They were always fascists.
That was a cover. They were always espousing fascist/Nazi rhetoric, like both of those people.
Who is this?
Stu Peters and Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, Nick Fuentes is a Nazi. I mean, he's a Nazi for real.
Right.
I mean, I think he'll tell you he's a Nazi.
Yes. And that's why people should stop pretending that he or anybody associated with or aligned with him is a good person, because no, they aren't.
Yeah. Well, the paleocons are just pre-World War II American-style conservatives. I mean, what Americans think of as conservatives tend to be the post-war conservatives, like the William F. Buckley, Goldwater, Reagan conservatives, or the neocons. That's like the Bill Kristol types.
Yeah, the flag-waving Murica types.
Yeah. Well, I do see.
Well,
They used to be isolationist. They were nationalistic. They were socially conservative, but they were isolationist.
Right.
Well, question then, Keith, where do you put because I see a divide in conservatives. Okay, forget stupidity, forget Fuentes, but I do see authentic conservatives that are just like maybe the Massey types, and I have friends like that. I have friends who are just like, hey, I'm not an anarchist per se, but I just don't want really they're almost minarchists. And then I see Conservative Inc. So is Conservative Inc. neocons and
well, Conservatism Inc. is more than neocons, but they are an outgrowth of movement conservatism or post-war movement conservatism. But what happened is that neocons embedded themselves in Conservatism Inc., and then they essentially became the intellectual leadership of it, particularly on foreign policy. So that's why there's such a blurring of the two. But they're not really the same thing. There's someone like Tom Massey is just like a classical liberal.
Okay.
Yeah, when I think Conservative Inc., I just think of the Ben Shapiro types who they don't call themselves neocons, but they're neocons.
Oh, he's a neocon.
I just do it as kind of like the controlled opposition. They pretend, they're for boomers who want to feel rebellious because, they complained about people with, their pronouns in their Twitter bios, but they don't actually care about anything that's a threat to the establishment. They're owned by the same companies that own, CNN and MSNBC. But, you can feel like you're being rebellious by listening to, Ben Shapiro rant about pronouns or porn or whatever the fuck he's going on about nowadays.
Well, Ben Shapiro is from the younger generation of neocons, and they tend to be somewhat more economically conservative. Like they're closer to being actual Reaganites or Ayn Randians or something when it comes to economics. Like the older neocons, like the Irving Kristol, Norman Podhoretz, the Kagan Sr., they were more like New Deal Democrats in their economic outlook. I mean, they didn't care much about economics, but they were fine with like a moderately social democratic, welfare state type of approach to economics. That just wasn't an issue for them. They were more interested in foreign policy. But you have some of the younger neocons, like Matt Continetti. He's another one. That's Bill Kristol's son-in-law. That some of these guys are closer to being actual Reaganites in terms of their outlook on economics.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about, because I saw the huge thing that happened. This was the only time I'm like, okay, I'll look at the Daily Wire, because Candace Owens said, well, I guess she broke rank and said, hey, I'm going to have Norman Finkelstein on, because he actually did this weird thing of studying it since the 70s or 80s and coming up with his conclusions that they didn't like. I don't know what Norman Finkelstein's economic or view is, but I found that
he used to be a Maoist. Back in the 70s, he was a Maoist. I think he's moderated some of his views since then. He's just basically probably just like a social democrat or something. But his parents were concentration camp survivors. One was in Auschwitz, and the other one I think was in Belsenberg.
Yeah, if anyone wants like a fun time, look up the video where he fucking rips into that college student who wants to accuse him for anti-Semitism because you said the facts that made my brain boner deflate.
Yeah. Well, Norman Finkelstein though was he's old enough that he's from the New Left generation from the 60s. So he said that when he was growing up, his parents were Stalinists. They were, because Stalin was the one that put an end to the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. So of course his parents loved Stalin. Like he said in his household growing up, you could not say a bad word about Stalin, and you could never say a good word about Germans.
Real quick, just because there are tankies and that might be watching this right now because of the group I posted this in, just to be super clear here, this is one of the areas where you might get a slight W, because the Black Book of Communism that so many right-wingers jack off about includes deaths of Nazis to Stalinist fucking forces. So that's when I found that out, it was one of the key moments where I realized that I am being propagandized against the left just as much as I'm being propagandized against a bunch of other shit, because it's wow, they tried to get me to fucking feel bad for Nazis. No, in fact, I won't.
Does anyone even cite the Black Book of Communism anymore, though?
Oh yeah, plenty of people do. They're
maybe
hundreds
on the
of
right
people.
I've never seen anyone actually use it. I usually see them go to other academic sources, but tankies love to bring it up as a straw man. They'll be like, "Oh, I bet you're gonna start citing the Black Book of Communism. Don't you? That contains."
Yeah, well, the problem.
Instead of doing it, they'll just say numbers from it, like 100 million, that sort of thing. Go ahead, Keith.
Well, I was just going to say that the problem with the Black Book of Communism is that they basically claim everybody who ever died in the Soviet Union or Maoist was personally killed by Stalin or Chairman Mao. It's like, somebody has a heart attack, victim of communism. It's I mean, there were a lot of deaths in those systems. I mean, there were purges and massacres.
Right. We gain nothing by inflating the numbers, though.
And I'm going to say right here, anybody watching this, I am completely anti-tanky. Karl Marx was not a communist. Transition period is the dumbest thing I ever heard. That's literally like telling someone, hey, you have a problem drinking. I do. Well, I'll tell you what you do. We'll go to an AA meeting and we'll crack open a 6-pack tonight. And then eventually you'll not want to drink anymore. I'm like, that person will probably die.
Even worse, it's just taking the same bottle of booze and putting the people's booze on it, and then suddenly you're not an alcoholic.
So, in my opinion, there's a few things that could, like, if I could go back in time, maybe people find this, but I would say the anti-federalists were right. The Articles of Confederation not perfect, but I would say Bakunin should have, kicked Marx out before he got kicked out. And if we really want to, bend straws and everything, I honestly think, Twin Oaks, Anarchia, Rehova, a bunch, the Zapatistas are kind of, in there, that there are functional communities that really are communist, and there's not a bunch of people dying. So yeah, I'm completely anti-tanky, completely anti-communist, not pro-Putin, not pro anything. Yes, I still do like Jefferson Davis and General Lee for standing up for their home state, but that's about it. Just want to make that. Sorry.
So
my bad.
The general vibe that I wanted to convey by that is to say that that's one of the key ways that they keep their power is they've got to keep you afraid of a scary foreign threat. So or a scary threat here at home. So the wokes are the new addition to the commies, are the new addition to the terrorists, are the new addition to the fucking subversive, when they say, and that's the reason I went off about the woke shit last time, because when they say I'm anti-woke, what they really mean is buy my course, my book, my podcast.
Yes.
They don't actually give a shit. It's a brand. And with the people who do are genuinely terrible in more ways than that, because they're not just banking on fascism that destroys lives and hurts minorities, but they're doing it because they're actively maliciously on board. A good example I could bring up, for instance, is something that I think needs more coverage, which is Karlin Borisenko of Unwoke. And she's big in libertarian circles. A bunch of people follow her on Twitter, but she actively had prison correspondence with her boyfriend / husband, I think is now her husband, who was convicted and pled guilty to distribution of child porn. And not only that, but the reason that he had this was because he was hiding cameras places. So let's be super clear here and say that this guy is the actual groomer, and the wokes that she goes against are not. And she actively defends pedophilia on more than those occasions. And so I posted this thread about her earlier because she posted this dumb fuck thread. She's like, "Scoop! On Monday, Communist U.S. launched a new revolutionary communist political party, receiving over 2.3 million views. But back in October 2023, the same group held an event in New York City and explained how they're going to overthrow the U.S. government." And it's yeah, they did. And they had fucking in this video on YouTube. It was fucking public. This isn't a scoop. You didn't get a scoop. There was no scoop here. You said your opinion about a thing that people already talked about. And this chick, literally, she runs this unwoke thing like the unwoke art, unwoke wiki, actively unwoke. Those are her three. It's like this is the grift I was talking about. And that's the reason we need to be aware of this, because people like her are supporting real predators while saying that the wokes are the predators.
I think
Carlin is a psychologist. I mean, I've never known a psychologist who wasn't insane. I mean, that's why
they go into psychology.
Right, exactly. Every mental health professional. I used to work in a mental hospital that way, like over 30 years ago. But I used to work in one, and everybody on the staff was crazier than the patients were.
Neuroscience is not better. The intelligent ones go into neuroscience. Just so you know.
Yeah. This husband guy that Carlin has, is that her real husband, or is she one of these prison groupies that like marries a guy in jail?
She has pictures with him, and he wasn't in jail at the time. I don't think. I think that she knew him before that.
Yeah, and there's a ton of them too. There's James Lindsay. There's libs of TikTok. They don't really care about helping people. They just want to, in my opinion, sell a book, get views, help the wokes. But you know what this reminds me of? I was talking to my dad about this today, and I said, "Why is everybody so scared of it?" To me, it's just the new McCarthyism, and to me, McCarthy, from what I understand, threw out a bunch of people, help, the Red Scare, they're coming for us, they're coming for us. And people tried to red pill me on this, and I actually went back and said, I think McCarthy was just mentally ill, in my opinion. And he threw out one of the best scientists that helped make the atomic bomb that the U.S. used on Japan. So we can debate it, but I'd love to get your perspective on this, Keith. Was McCarthy really doing the right thing, or was he just completely out of his mind and trying to find a scapegoat for Uncle Sam to be like, help the commies? Now it's the wokes. Now they'll make it something different in a few years. Oh, it's this. These guys it's the Islamists. It's this guy. It's that guy. It's the Russians. It's the Chinese.
Well, McCarthy was a guy who saw an opening for, career advancement. He was, he's a classic case of a demagogue. There's a debate on the right about how well did he really expose Soviet agents or whatever in the government. I mean, it's true. There really were Soviet agents in the U.S. government back then, just like there were American agents in the Soviet government back then.
Yep.
And in some of the World War II era presidential administrations, you had what they used to call comsems, or like these are communist fellow travelers, basically. Some of them were former communists, former socialists that had low level administrative positions and stuff. But it was some of those kinds of people that McCarthy started off by attacking. But I mean, the Joe McCarthy was just an alcoholic and a morphine addict who basically saw an opportunity to get his name in the paper by creating a ruckus. He was like when I was a teenager, you had that going on about like heavy metal and rock music. The rock is turning people into Satanists.
And they're still doing that. Michael Knowles did that like a month ago.
Yeah, he's so 80s retro. I mean, that is like so 80s retro. I saw one of those videos. I'm like, this is like 1982. I mean, this is like when I was like 17. I used to hear this kind of shit.
Yeah, and Lady Ballers might as well be a chick tract, like Jack Chick Tract.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, they used to give us those to go pass out door to door.
Same. Fucking hate that shit.
Wait, what were they passing out?
Jack you ever seen those Christian comic books? They're called Chick Tracts because the guy that created that series was named Jack T. Chick.
Okay.
He was a crazy Christian fundamentalist who created this line of comic books, and they're like
because they won't turn you into Satanists like those other comic books.
Yeah, well, they're like these little small rectangular shaped comic books, and it's always just some weird theme about how somebody doesn't love Jesus enough, so they end up going to hell or something.
Yep.
It's like one of my favorites was about it was called the Green Angels or something like that, but it's about a Christian rock group. All right, and then they start off as like these innocent Christian rockers, and then they sell their souls to Satan to become rock stars, right? So then they all turn gay and die of AIDS.
Oh God.
Which gets me.
Yeah,
weird way that people are like, America's a Christian country, and to me, and I have nothing. Funny enough, I ran for school board. I ran with 2 blue dog Democrats, like my old man, and one blue dog Democrat, sorry, one old school Republican, and another one. Interestingly enough, we were sitting in the Republican hall, and I said, Pat, you have 2 rings on, and he was an older dude, so he's like, I says this, and very, very friendly. And I got to talking. I'm like, you have the compass here. You're a Mason. Are you? He's like, yeah, we're a Mason. We believe. And I think the majority of the founding fathers, to me, aside from Christians, were Masons. So, and then there's always been this weird thing about the Freemasons, that they're evil, that they're bad, that they're trying to demonize them, which I find funny because the first president of the United States was a Mason. It's like, no, nothing but Christian. It's Christian country. Like,
but the true reactionaries, that is the throne and altar European conservatives, to this day, they will say that the American Revolution was a Masonic revolution. And I mean, that type of conservatism has always been very anti-U.S. founding fathers. You can find that in a lot of far-right literature from Europe. It's pretty, like, you ever heard of Charles Marat? He was a French, monarchist, reactionary, whatever. But he used to say there was like the 4 pillars or whatever he used to attack. It was Masons, Protestants, Jews, and I think Marxists were the other. But yeah, that's true conservatism. I mean, that's the true right. That they consider the American Revolution been a Masonic plot. The U.S. founding fathers, though, were mostly just Anglicans. They were nominal Anglicans. They didn't really take it that seriously. Some of them were Masons. But I mean, Masonry was just kind of like a prototype for Unitarian or something. Unitarianism. It was kind of like a universalist, nominally, pseudo-Christian religion with a lot of Enlightenment influences.
Right.
But during the time of the American Revolution, Christianity wasn't really thriving during that period. It's like a lot of times people, when they think about early America, they think about the Puritans and all that stuff. And that's when Christianity was really rolling in parts of the United States. And then later on, too, during the Great Awakenings. But during the American Revolutionary period, the elite tended to not be very religious. They tended to just basically be, I'm Anglican, what of it,
You mean a bunch of people who owned slaves weren't following the Bible too closely?
Well, slavery's in the Bible.
Bible's
You can be a good Christian and be a slave owner.
Yeah.
In the Bible.
Well, you can be an old school follower of like the older testaments, but
Okay,
like Christ built the law and he freed the slaves. That was kind of part of the reason he was fucking killed.
Well,
yeah,
I don't really agree with that. I actually think you could be a solid New Testament Christian and be a slaveholder. In my view, there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't be a slaveholder.
Well, at some point, I'll make a video like saying Christ himself is anti-slavery. I'll explain my position. But
didn't he say, do unto others as you would do unto you? It's kind of hard to do that and be like, hey, can I enslave you?
If you don't view them as people, though, like if you just view them as possessions.
Sorry.
The quote, the Jesus quote that says, "Do unto others as you would do unto them." That comes from the Good Samaritan parable. But if you actually go and read that parable, they are not talking about just do good to other people. That's not what that parable means. I mean, I don't want to get into some really detailed theological treatise here, but it's like what that story is about is Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and then one of his followers says, "Who is my neighbor?" And then he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And then after he tells the story, Jesus says, "Now who was a neighbor to the guy who was hurt?" And then the follower said, "Well, the guy who helped him." And then Jesus says, "Right." And what he's saying is, people, your neighbor are people who do good to you, right? If they don't do good to you, fuck them, right? But your neighbor is somebody who does good to you. Now, I have a much wider, theological interpretation of this. It's beyond what we're talking about here. It's somewhat heretical, even from a heretical perspective. But
I'll make a video on it, and you can let me know what you think once I put it out. Because I think that from a Christian perspective, like a huge amount of the stuff that alleged Christians want to go back to, is very, very anti-Christ. And one of the heretical people I talk about, like, that would agree with that is Tolstoy, and I'll be pulling from him pretty heavily. But like my point in saying that was that like the founders had a whole lot of anti-Christian beliefs and practices, and like when you try to call the founding of America Christian, A, Christ would be offended if he heard that, and B, like anybody should be offended by that because it's saying that, you know, the fucking founding of this country was enshrined by God. I don't think so. I think the founding of this country was enshrined by French gold. And by, like, you know, Dutch gold, and by a bunch of shit that made the US not independent but beholden to foreign nations, which is why the Whiskey Rebellion happened and was quelled by George Washington and 13,000 other bitch ass motherfuckers. Like, those people at the founding were anti-Christ in every conceivable way. They were running an empire, and like, from any consistent libertarian, anarchist, whatever position, that should be the conclusion people come to. Not, we must return to Christianity or we'll surely perish down the path of statism and you know, fucking, or perish down the path of woke or commie or whatever. Like, maybe if these people actually behaved like Christians, that would be good, but they're not doing that. They just want to force people to do what they want, using Christ as a foil for that.
Correct.
Well, the founders of the United States, the education of a privileged class male during that time period was rooted in Greco-Roman intellectual culture. That's what they grew up studying, you know, Aristotle and that kind of stuff.
Which is why there are Feskis everywhere.
And right, well, that's why so much early American architecture is basically classical architecture. But the norm was you grew up studying Greek and Latin and that kind of stuff. The Bible was used for the, you know, indoctrination of peons and slaves and women, you know, people they thought that were a lesser categories of people. Now, you did have Christians among the merchant class, like among a lot of the northern merchant class, like John Adams was a Christian. One of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, John Witherspoon, was a Calvinist pastor, but that wasn't the norm. Most of those people were, you know, it's like I've always heard evangelicals talk about John Witherspoon or somebody like that. Like, it's like, yeah, we founded America, and no, you didn't. You know, it was
the Gnostics and deists did.
Yeah, well, that's like saying because a handful of the founders were Catholics or one or two were Jewish or something, that the United States was a Catholic country. And no, it was an Anglo-Protestant country by heritage.
Or, hey, like saying the Jews owned the slave boats because you can point to a few Jews in a sea of slave boat owners and pretending that the Jews actually ran the slave trade so that you can pit blacks against the Jews because you're a Nazi piece of shit.
Yeah, well, you had Jews in the slave trade in Europe, but that was financed. The slave trade itself was financed by European royalties.
Yep,
which were the, you know, monarch, which were the native ethnic groups of those regions. So, you know, like it's fashionable among a lot of the anti-Semites to blame everything on what they call the small hats. But what I always tell them is there's no small hats without the top hats.
Yeah, fucking pieces of shit. I hate them all. I hate all those motherfuckers.
I have one easy historical question about Christianity, whether, you know, you want to argue this or that, or the golden rule, or if you want to argue, okay, there was more Masons and the founding fathers less. But I think everybody agrees, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, Jewish, from the Old Testament at least, I've never read the Talmud, that Jesus was either killed by the state or they attempted to kill him. So the weirdest thing I would ask anyone, if you're a Christian, Mark Passio brings this up. He said, who ultimately did the crucifixion? The state, the Roman Empire, the police and military of his day. So it baffles me that any Christian would actually say, I'm a Christian, I support the state. I'd say the first part of being a Christian is, if you're going to be an actual Christian, is like my friend Jacob Winograd, that Germany. Then you have to say no king but Christ. Mm-hmm. Well, Christ's going to be the only king that, or, you know, you're going to revere the Father as the only. I guess you can have the Council of Nicaea, or they one or two, but if you're going to be logically consistent, shouldn't you say, okay, well, the only person I can serve is Christ. And I'll probably misquote this too, but isn't there a quote that says, it's not, I don't know if it's an anarchist quote.
No man can serve two masters is a Bible verse.
I was going to say, give unto Caesar's what is Caesar. I use that as an anti-taxation quote, but I'm not sure if that is.
So basically Christian anarchists are the only correct Christians. I mean, okay, I guess they're better than
I would agree and disagree with that in the sense that I would say Christian anarchists are one of the few admirable branches of Christianity. They're
actually
actually
getting at, yes.
Yeah, but they're actually heretics from the point of view of historic Christianity. Like,
which is a good thing.
Yeah, good for them. But the actual text of the Bible is actually fairly soft on the Romans. What the most of their venom is towards the Jews. Like it says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. That means pay your taxes, do your civic duty, and pay your taxes, like the Romans are telling you. There's a passage from the book of Romans that says the powers that be are ordained of God. You know, if you do not want to fear the authorities, then do what is right, meaning obey the law. Even when it comes to the death of Jesus, they kind of let Pontius Pilate off the hook. You know, they kind of look at it like, well, you know, Pontius Pilate in that story is portrayed as this guy who says, you know, I don't really want to kill an innocent man. And then the Jews are saying, kill him. And then Pontius Pilate says, well, how about I kill this Barabbas guy? He's actually a real criminal. You know, they, oh no, forget him, kill Jesus. But first of all, that story is totally fictional. There was nothing in Jewish or Roman law that would allow one criminal to take the place of another one. So the story's made up. What that story is an allegory for the Yom Kippur, which is a Jewish practice that Christianity is derivative of Judaism, and Jesus is the Yom Kippur. So forget the theology, but all through, and the real historic Pontius Pilate was a notorious brigand with the Jews. I mean, he was like Eichmann or something. He couldn't kill enough Jews. So it's not like he would ever have had any bad conscience about killing an innocent man who was Jewish. He didn't care whether they were innocent or not. But so the actual text of the Bible puts the blame for the death of Jesus squarely on the Jews, and this kind of makes the old Romans look like almost like, you know, innocent bystanders, you know.
Well, there is something here though. Like the Romans specifically, those were letters to Romans. And you'll notice that there's never a similar command anywhere else in the Bible to pay your taxes. And the render unto Caesar thing, to me, that runs along the same train. And I went over this in a recent and in multiple other streams that I've had on Christian anarchy with Christian anarchists. Basically, the render unto Caesar thing makes sense in context of the same thing that Jesus also said to the rich man, that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And he said this to this guy because he's basically saying that as long as you're serving your possessions, as long as your possessions are, you got your money on your mind, I won't be there. So basically, if you're fucking trying to justify your place in this empire, if you're trying to, get like the favor of the government, then you're not with me. So either way, if you're trying to build your kingdom here on earth, you're stacking your treasures here on earth, and you're not giving it up so that you can live a more holy life. If you're trying to play their game, you're not going to be serving me. You're going to be walking in darkness. You're going to be serving another master. You're going to grow to hate me because you're going to be serving them. So if it shouldn't be a second thought. It's just money. It doesn't matter that you're giving it to the Roman Empire, because ultimately in the end run of it, you should be following me, and the money should be completely meaningless to you. It's just like your small participation in the system to not get thrown into the dungeons of the lion's pit or the gladiator arenas or whatever. So ultimately, or just get your head lost or whatever. So ultimately, when I see these verses as very clearly and explicitly saying your money doesn't matter. Whose face is on this coin? It is Caesar's. Well, then render unto Caesar's what is his. So it's saying in two ways. It's saying basically eschew this system because it doesn't actually matter. And the amount of money that is taken from you if you're following me, I will give you what you need. And then the second half of it is, in fact, nothing belongs to Caesar. All is his. All should be for his glory. So if you like need in this context, your money to be given to anyone, sure, it has his face on it. It's part of his system. Don't be wedded to your money. Don't be wedded to your possessions. That doesn't matter as much as following a holy lifestyle. So yeah, sure, give it up and do it like immediately, because if you're wedded enough to your money to get this angry when it's taken from you, then you're probably still stuck in the system, and you're not considering the fact that your treasure is already in heaven, as he said in another verse about like the priests pouring their wealth down a funnel to look all fucking cool about it. He said they have their reward already. And so it's like you're supposed to not aspire to wealth. You're supposed to not stack your treasures on earth, because that's going to fuck with your relationship with God.
Right. Well, the original Christians believed were very apocalyptic. They thought the end of the world was coming in their lifetimes. So their thing was basically, we don't need material wealth or any of that, and because the world's going to end, so fuck it, And also, originally Christianity was like this network of secretive underground cults. It was an illegal religion, and if you joined, you were supposed to give all your wealth to the group. You were supposed to pull your wealth to support the group. And that's why they were so big on renouncing wealth and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the world's coming, and you should pull your wealth to support the group, and beyond that, don't worry about material conditions.
And because if you said no, you might die.
Well, I think that was also about trying to keep them out of trouble with the Roman authorities as well. It was about, don't break the law, but they'll come after you. And you'll get all of us in trouble. I think that was a big part of it. Well, like my theory on what the origin of the communion ritual is, my theory on that is that it was originally a test to see who was truly loyal to the group and who wasn't. Because, in Roman culture, cannibalism was taboo. It was considered a barbarian practice. And but some of the pagan religions had sacred meals, like the cult of Osiris. They would eat bread and drink beer. And then Dionysus was the god of wine. So I think that drink the blood of Christ, eat the body of Christ. I think that was probably a test that they would put converts to, where meaning that if they were willing to engage in this symbolic cannibalism, well, to them it wasn't symbolic. They believed in transubstantiation, which means you really are drinking the blood and eating the body of Christ. So I think it was basically a test where if you're willing to engage in this kind of ritualistic cannibalism, that means you're all in. You're a part of the group. We can trust you. You're not going to betray us to the Roman authorities or anything like that. It's just like in the mafia when you take a blood oath to the Gambinos or something like that.
Okay, so let me transition this. If we're talking about like wed to money,
that sounds pretty woke. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. That's that term. Yeah, a lot of people are grifting from that. But I was watching Reeducation and Anarch, who are two good, you want to call them, I guess you call them ANCOM creators, or
well, they would call themselves that, so it's good that you call them that.
Yeah, hey, I'm working on it. Plus, Reeducation has a cool thing. I mean, there's a couple fun people following called Bro Potkin, which has Kropotkin beer hat. Funny. But what he said is, and this is true, your bank balance right now is a text file. He said the issue that happens is a lot of people can't get the resources or access they need, whether it's religious or not, because of a text file. And his idea was just you do mutual aid. Like, okay, Keith can teach me about different forms of anarchism, and I can play guitar. So I'll play guitar. And then, and I remember when I first got into anarchism, there was a guy named Penny Rumbard of Dalhouse. He was the drummer of Crass. And what he did in Dalhouse is he said, like, you come, you have some artistic ability, and then I'll give you some food. And that's in it. And it's not tied to anything. It's not a commune traditional sense of like, oh, you have to have do you believe in Bakunin? It's like, hey, I can do this, so I'll do this. And his idea is you run a whole society on that by saying, well, I can do this, this, and this. Okay,
so
great.
skill sharing networks. Yeah.
Skill sharing networks, or what he calls gift share economies, or
yeah.
I guess like mutual aid. Now, I know the ANCAPs are going to like, dude, they'll lead to shortages. You don't have price signals, but
Well,
you keep it small.
it works it works within like networks of like-minded people or within, small like-minded communities. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any profound disagreement with the ANCOMs. The problem is like it only works in small intentional communities. You start to scale it up, and then either you need, markets to control distribution of scarce resources, or you need, a command economy. So, I mean, I think we all know which one of those is preferable. But yes. Yeah. Anyway, we were talking about skill sharing networks.
But the Soviet Union put rockets in space.
Oh yeah,
it did, but that was authoritarian communism. I guess the argument. I guess
and
my
also
overall
those
argument.
literacy rates.
I guess
the funny thing is, whenever I've debated Marxist-Leninists about this, they'll talk about what they tend to fall back on is the technological and industrial and military.
The industrialization, yeah,
of the Soviet Union.
They were the only country to do that.
Right, exactly. I've told them that. I said the arguments you're using could be used to defend the historic capitalist states like the European colonialist empires. It could be used to defend the ancient tyrannies, the Roman pharaohs and Caesars. I mean, look at all the great stuff they built, roads and pyramids and all this cool shit. It could be used to defend the Asian tigers like Singapore and South Korea and those places. You could even use the Third Reich as an example. I mean, Autobahn, that's awesome. Volkswagens, I can be against Volkswagens,
Yeah, that wouldn't exist if it weren't for the Nazis. So,
but we have such good trains.
Yeah.
And they ran on time too.
Yeah,
well, I doubt that.
That's just good.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
But I guess my question is, Keith, let's say you have a we culture. They're very community oriented. So you can't really throw Tucker or Roth. I mean, I guess you can throw Tucker or Rothbard around, but I don't think they'd go for it. I don't really think, even if you got everybody to get on board with anarchy tomorrow, I think there are people like, just like people who are embedded in Confucianism, Arabic communities who are very communal. If you had kibbutz systems, there with like if everybody's getting along, I don't think you could throw Rothbard and be like, looky, or Triple H, because they'll be like, no, this is super individualistic. So to me, and even maybe Europe because it's closer. Could you achieve the same technological and scientific achievements if you had decentralized communes and workers in federations working in those communes like Malatesta and Kropotkin produced? And would it be probably more moral than the counterpart, which is the authoritarian leftist idea of Marx and Engels? I think it would, but obviously I can't prove that because like Twin Oaks is just there. But if Twin Oaks had 100 different Twin Oaks, do you think they could achieve space exploration? Believe in space.
I know of no inherent barrier to that. I don't know that it would happen, but I know of no specific reason why it wouldn't.
And is it possible to abolish money like some of the ANCOMs say?
Well, you're going to need some kind of medium of exchange. If it's not cold hard cash, it'll be something.
Until
it could be something more.
Scarcity, there's going to be some kind of unit of exchange, I think.
Yeah, I mean it could be something more sophisticated than dollars and cents, but it's it could be like techno widgets or something, but
do you well, I guess my question is, but I guess re-education's point is that look, the skills inherent. I guess he is going off by Marx's quote, to each according to his ability, to each according to their needs, which means, okay, money's out of the equation. I can do said skill. You can do said skills. So if we combine said skills, you would effectively achieve what Mises would call social cooperation under the division of labor, which just means, okay, I want your book. Okay, I'm going to send it. I'm going to have you say, okay, you can type. And because you can type, I'm going to give you some food. Okay, then I'm going to send it off to the publisher. And the publisher needs his house cleaned, so I'll clean the publisher's house. The publisher publishes, puts the book on paper, and then we need a distribution center. So, okay, the Amazon driver gets rewarded with this skill and then this skill and then gift share economy. I mean, I'm trying to rationalize it here. I know what the ANCAPs will say. My Rothbardian friends will be like, "Oh no, there'll be shortages. The shortages." I'm not necessarily convinced there would be. I just think you need some sophisticated way of understanding how ANCOM theory works to solve social cooperation under the division of labor.
Well, the issue with that is scale. How well is that going to scale? The more localized a system like this that is, the more workable it is. When you start bringing in, thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people, it becomes a lot more difficult. I think that's when you're going to probably end up having some kind of unit of exchange. I mean, it could be, it could be anything. It could be, it could be something like a scan your finger and there's like, a DNA scan or something. And that's like your unit of exchange. And for every whatever of DNA, you get like, 5,000 credits or something. I mean, anything could be a unit of exchange. But I think there's going to be some kind of a unit of exchange once you start to scale.
I feel, funny enough, because a lot of Reds have and a lot of people who maybe are like ANCOMs also, like I see like ANCAPs will work with a lot with the individualists or mutualists or something like that. But I see a lot of people who maybe ANCOMs are not going to be for the super. Funny enough, I think if we're going to have anarcho-transhumanist ANCAPs,
you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think ANCOMs would be more on the side of like the primitivists, like, no, I don't want a hand scanner. But I guess my question is, since things work on a small scale, what if you have what instead of the EU, you had just a million communes in France that are consisting of, I guess, Dave Pacman, who I don't like, but I'll agree with this argument. Generally, 150 to 200 peoples where you can get good social cohesion. So you have
the Dunbar number. 150 is the Dunbar number. Yeah.
Okay, I guess that's why. Because like someone asked Dave Pacman, I think it was Lex Friedman, why are you so against libertarianism? And Dave Pacman to me is just your neoliberal commentator, like Sam Cedar, just run of the mill. He said, well, once you get past 150 people, I'm sitting there in my bed looking at my phone thinking, the whole point of anarchism is to keep it generally small. I don't want like huge cities. I think cities are a statist concept, and a lot of people agreed with me on that. I'm not saying tear down Pittsburgh because I worked there, but if it's gone, whatever. I don't care. I don't care if New York's gone. I don't care if LA is gone.
I'm okay with New York being gone.
Yeah, it's kind of So I don't care, but I'm okay with all cities being gone. Cairo has its problems. The traffic's horrendous. So if you get rid of cities, which are statist concepts, and you have small commune, small commune, small commune, small commune, and they're all doing skill share economies and federations of workers, is it then possible? Sorry, that was a loaded dose.
Well, it gets back to what you consider scale to be, or what you consider centralization to be, or even what you consider a market to be. Like what a swap meet is?
No,
I don't know how common they are anymore, but they used to be these things where people would get together and you basically just bring a whole lot of junk that you don't want.
Trade.
And you trade it with people for other people's junk you do want. That's what a swap meet is. Well, I mean, you could theoretically have a swap meet that millions of people are participating in online. In fact, I think they used to have a section on Craigslist that was kind of like that.
They have it now called Free Cycle. There's a whole website dedicated to it, and like also not just swap meets, but also flea markets, smaller but like you got like these small clusters of economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead though.
When I was a kid, my mom used to drag me to flea markets. I used to say they call them flea markets because when you come back, you're going to be full of fleas with all the trash that's there. But but the thing is, when you're talking about these kinds of arrangements, is this a free market or is this communism? It all depends on how you define these terms. Whenever I've raised the example of things like Twin Oaks to ANCAPs, they'll say, yeah, but they're practicing capitalism. They're a capitalist enterprise. They're functioning on a market. but if they don't consider themselves that, it's so I mean, I don't know, maybe it's communized capitalism or capitalized communism or something. It's
funny because I mean the tankies would consider that still to be private property.
Yeah, well, from their vantage point, it is.
I mean, I consider it part of the market. I consider, not for profit or volunteer or mutual aid networks part of the market. But I think some people might disagree.
Yeah,
here's the problem.
The thing is, it's like to a Marxist proper, socialism and or socialism means you have a centrally planned economy. If you're a Marxist and you don't believe in a centrally planned economy, then you're no longer a Marxist. You're something else, right? And the same thing is true with capitalism. If you claim to be a capitalist but you don't believe in private profit making, then you're not a real capitalist, because that's what the term means. It was invented to describe private profit making, commerce for the purpose of private property.
And specifically private ownership of means of production.
Right. Yeah. So if you don't believe in that, then you're not really a capitalist. It's and so these terms are often used much more broadly than they were intended to be used.
What if it was a simple distinction? Sorry, a simple distinction. Markets are where you use money as a signal to achieve social cooperation under the division of labor. And I guess if you want to say something analogous to markets, without the state, then it's exchange or skill share economies are the opposite of that. So I guess it comes down to, ANCAP or ANCOM, are you using money or not? And the reason I say that is because if we forget about Marx, because I don't think any anarchist believes in a centrally planned economy, because then you need central planners, and then that's not really going to be anarchist. So if I break it down, the readers, the writers I like, I can't say if Bakunin was against money, but I know Kropotkin and Malatesta said we need an intelligent decentralization without the use of money. And I've thought about that, and I said, all these ANCAPs tell me, which I'm friends with, which I like, I want you to end the Fed and go back to sound money. And part of me says, well, Thomas Massey's the only one who would put a bill to do that. Maybe Rand Paul, maybe even someone like, I don't like him, but like Chip Roy or some of the more, non-crazy Republicans might support it. But probably maybe 6 or 7 Republicans, even the Freedom Caucus would support ending the Fed. So to me, if you really want to end the Fed now, I would say mutual aid and direct action is the best way to do that. But if I say abolish money, everybody's going to be big mad.
Well, that's not realistic once you get outside of small, intentional communities. Okay, so here's an analogy. Suppose you're hosting a dinner party for a bunch of people, and you make one dish that everyone really likes and they eat all of it, and then there's not enough, so you run out prematurely, and everyone's mad because there's not enough for everyone. Then you make something else that people don't like, so they don't take much of it. Okay, you've gotten feedback there. Okay, this one thing went over really well. People are angry, so next time make more. Other thing, no one wanted it. Again, there's feedback there. However, that only works on a small scale. You scale things up, and you need another system of feedback. Money provides that. It provides you with an internal feedback mechanism. You have prices rising, you have prices falling. So again, eliminating money in an economy of scale is just not realistic.
But here's the thing, funny, and I own Bitcoin, I own dollars, I own Arabic, I own a lot of Egyptian pounds in my bank account in Egypt. So and I like a lot of ANCAP theory, and I'm a fan of, and I tell people to go read Rothbard, and I tell people to go read Spooner and Hoppe and everything like that. Except when I'm in anarcho-syndicalist chats, they don't like Hoppe mentioned, which I understand why.
No, most people do not like
Hoppe. Very
you have to be careful mentioning Hoppe.
Yes, I know, because he said some terrible things also about the LGBT community.
Yeah,
and he also said crush the
things are just not really relevant anymore. Okay, yes, but
Okay.
Anyway.
Well,
Also,
Hoppe
like he
is
says,
interesting.
crush
if
the
you-
anti-fascist mob, so any anti-fascist would obviously feel like crushed.
Yeah, well, Hoppe is interesting because he actually critiques modern democracy from a libertarian perspective.
No, and he's
But
correct about democracy. I will say
But
that much.
most of what he's saying there is just a reworking of what older thinkers said. Like a lot of that is just a recycling of Eric von Kuehnert-Leddihn and Eric Vogelin and a lot of your European style, traditional conservatives who were always hostile to democracy, Carl Schmitt, people like that. So it's not like Hoppe's thinking there is all that original. I remember when I first discovered him, it was like 25 years ago or something. I read some of his critiques of democracy. I'm like, wow, this guy's really original. This is far out stuff. But the more familiar I became with European intellectual traditions, the more I realized, no, he's just reworking all that stuff.
So I guess I'll get to the point from your point, Rose, and then a similar point a YouTuber made. I made a comment, but he never answered it because I feel he's a Trump grifter, which is sticks, hex, and hammer 666. He said the problem with anarchism is decentralized centralization. I said, well, every Trump supporter I've ever met who said, Kareem, get Trump back. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Why? Because, my school board's bad, because my mayor is this, because I'm like, it sounds like you have local problems. Maybe you fix your local problems here. That's the local government. Local governments would be decentralized centralization, even under governments. So to me, if you drive through Pennsylvania, I don't know about Virginia, maybe Keith can tell me, or Washington or Spokane, it's little town, little town, little town. They're already little towns. Once a stop, and I'm not saying do this in America everywhere, or France or UK, but I suspect most countries are little towns, little villages. I know Afghanistan is. Wants to say, hey, guys, you're a little town. Here's how you do mutual aid. Try this. I'm not saying that would completely remove money, but maybe.
Right. No, the welfare state is what eliminated most of the mutual aid.
But if the welfare state's gone.
Well, one, personally, I can't afford to buy into a mutual aid society because I'm already having huge amounts of my paycheck taken to go into, the state's shitty welfare programs. Like, for example, like if I get laid off from my job tomorrow, okay, then I have to go beg the state for that unemployment money that I've been forced to pay. Maybe 6 weeks from now, they'll get back from me and let me know whether or not I've been approved for the money that I was forced to pay into it. Like, I'd much rather just invest in a mutual aid society or in like private unemployment insurance or something. I can't do that because 30% of my paycheck is being taken every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, talking about the classical anarchists like Bakunin and Kropotkin, Malatesta, Proudhon, the thing about them, remember that they were not in a modern industrial society. The culture that all of them came from was basically feudalism or the remnants of it. I mean, it was dying out during their time, but Kropotkin and Bakunin were Russians, Malatesta was Italian, and Proudhon was French. And the systems that they were used to were systems where some of them, they still had serfs and they still had like peons and you still had feudal lords and that kind of stuff in some of those systems. So they based a lot of their ideas about anarcho-communism on the peasant communes that existed in those kinds of societies where you had these agricultural communities that they produced for subsistence, and then the landlord would take their cut of it. And that's what they base communism on, anarchist communism, meaning we're just going to have the peasant communes, and only the peasants are just going to keep what they produce. We're not going to pay the feudal lords anything. That's their idea of anarcho-communism. But when you start getting into industrialization, that's when you start to see changes in anarchist theory towards syndicalism, because like early anarchists were basically coming out of a feudal culture. And then as anarchist movements grew, you had the propaganda by the deed period, which basically we're going to overthrow the ruling class by killing them all. And then that didn't work. So then they started going, as industrialization became more entrenched, they developed the anarcho-syndicalist tendency, which was the idea, well, we're going to organize the workers and we're going to seize the means of production. And then the factories and all that, they're going to be run by the workers without the capitalists, and it was just a repeat of the idea of the peasants are going to work the land without the feudal landlords. Now we're going to work the factories without the capitalist bosses. So the question would be, how do you update those kinds of ideas for a contemporary society, or should you?
Well, I have a question about that because I started actually going into Call Me Ezekiel. That's how I learned a lot of this stuff and just reading. And I think the more modern update to Bakunin and Kropotkin and all that was a guy, a Jewish author named Rudolf Rocker, who actually explained in detail how, if you're familiar with his work, how syndicalism could be structured. And after I read Rudolf Rocker, I'm not going to say I put on the electric slide and went slide to the left, but I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. I know. And then I shared it with my ANCAP friends and they're like, help, Kareem's gone, call me. Hell, what do we do? I'm like, no, I just listened to Rudolf Rocker while doing software engineering and it made sense. Like, it wasn't just, I'm mad because, Bob has more Teslas than me,
right?
Or more Federal Reserve notes, or, Susie is bad because she has more, refrigerators that talk to her. It would actually, Rudolf Rocker's structuring makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting is then I tried to find okay, who's a modern syndicalist society? And the only one I could really think of is the Zapatistas in Mexico. That's why I was like, oh, I'll go check them out. But I've heard some good things, some bad things. But from what I understand, they don't use the peso, and they have what I would understand as alternative local economic structures. I think they do use alternative currencies, and they have vouchers and coupons and stuff that can be exchanged for goods. So I don't know if that really, looks, it's kind of in the middle between. See, Maltese and Kropotkin, I think, we're just saying trade skills. And I think ANCAPs would say, no, you need a hard form, you need signals, because Mises said without signals, then everybody, that's why Marx's system failed, because you don't have money as a signal. So then price controls get out and then you have shortages. Mm-hmm. My understanding of the Zapatistas are they have goods and vouchers that can be exchanged for goods. Now, I don't know because I can't get into where the Zapatistas are. I'm thinking maybe sometime trying, but I know it's dangerous. But I think they have alternatives.
I knew an anarchist from New York that got killed down there.
Ooh. So how large of a scale are they operating on? How big are their communities?
The Zapatistas?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like, say in the United States, some people like this took over one of the states or something. Let me look up what their territorial side is.
Are they like the Free State Project in New Hampshire?
Well, they are basically that with real weapons.
Hey man, I like the New Hampshire people.
I mean, I'm not completely opposed to moving there.
All right, let's go on a field trip, guys.
Their territory is 9,400 square miles.
I like some of those people, but some of those people I do not. Like, for instance, Ian Freeman, who routinely talked about how 13-year-olds can consent.
Okay, but let's still go to Pork Fest. I don't like that, but
I'd love to.
So the Zapatistas don't exactly use money, but they do have a medium of exchange. So I guess is that syndicalism then? Because it's not complete exchange skills for skills, but it's
I'd say in practice, the Zapatistas are basically social democrats with some quasi-anarchistic leanings. Okay. And the Rojava group in Kurdish territory in Syria, they're the same way.
So it's not. So it's like Bernie Sanders land.
Well, a little more radical than Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is just an FDR Democrat. I mean, when I was growing up, there were tons of people like Bernie Sanders. They were all over the place.
Yeah, it's always funny when people call him a socialist. He's not. He's a social democrat at most. I guess that's considered radical.
Because he uses the word socialist.
True. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's I've been familiar with Bernie Sanders since he was the mayor of Burlington. I met Murray Bookchin once when he was still alive, because Murray lived in Burlington, and I asked him what he thought of Bernie. He said, yeah, he's a jerk.
Yeah, I saw Jan Helfield, if you're familiar with him. He's a minarchist.
You mean Jan?
And Jan, yeah. And he used to interview people, and he would just ask I I guess, Socratic dialectic questions. Like you say, the government is able to do this, this, and this. Yeah, okay, but if the government's able to do this, this, and this, is the government allowed to then, go ahead and invade something or take something for someone? He's like, yes, if that's legislated. But he's like, where does government power come from? And he got this Hawaiian senator really mad. He's like, yes, you can do whatever you want as long as you authorize the government. He's like, where does that power come from? Through the people. He's like, we just disagree. So you're saying the Zapatistas are anarchists, or they're not? Or is it?
No, I'd say they're more like social democrats. I mean, they've got some anarchistic features. They have some features that are similar to historic anarchism, but they're more like social democrats.
I guess the thing is, well, from my understanding, because when I was this is why I say Aaron Bushnell had an impact. Because when I was a kid, when I was like 10 or 11, other than Crass, someone handed me a CD, and they're like, "You'll like this, Kareem. You don't like George Bush." And I was looking at it, and I'm like, "Oh, this is brutal. This monk is on fire. Rage Against the Machine." And I remember listening to the song. It's coming back around again. Now, this is the people of the sun. How the PRI fought against the United States, involvement, and that to me is where the Zapatistas came from. But I don't know that the Zapatistas actually have if the Zapatistas have rulers, which it doesn't seem to me they do. Does that qualify? I guess it gets hard, as Leeson says, because like where do you draw the line? Like if someone's a village elder, are we not anarchist? If you have a syndicalist, if you have a guy who's in the charge of a union, does that make it not anarchist? I mean,
well, the anti-organizationalists would say yes. That's there's always been a debate about that among different types of anarchists. There are certain types of anarchists who say any kind of organization is not anarchist.
Okay,
and not just people who make fun of anarchists and say we can't have an organization. That's not anarchy. I mean, there used to be a tendency, like 100 years ago, so there was a tendency called anti-organizija, which is just Italian. It means anti-organizational.
Well, I've encountered these types. They'll claim that if you do any sort of organizing, suddenly you're a statist. I mean, I always just call them feds, but yeah.
Yeah.
But here's my understanding, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, because I like the quote by Maltesta, anarchy is organization, more organization. I do think actually anarchists are more organization minded than the state, where the state just like, will put two geriatric presidents, in a row, and they'll do that in the USSR too. So they're not very organization minded. I guess my understanding of the Zapatistas and things like that is this. If, in fact, they don't have former rulers and they have coordinators and spokespeople, then they are, in effect, anarchists. Just like I would say, if ANCAPs have, some guy who's head of, not a company, I don't know what it'd be called, but like a group of people to be anarchists. But I would also respect somebody if, I've never read Stirner, but if you have a Stirner, right, or a Tucker guy, or like the individualists and the egoists who say, I just want to do things on my own for the most part. I don't really want to be part of the organization except for conventional means, or I don't want to do that at all. I can accept that too, as long as they don't want a ruler. But I don't think Zapatistas have rulers. So I do, because my understanding is the municipality has a democratically elected council of community authorities. And so does Chiron.
Democracy. That's just localized social democracy.
So is Chiron not anarchist?
Well, they come closer to being actual anarchists. They don't call it that. They identify with their own indigenous traditions. They're just an indigenous society, basically. I guess you could say they're anarchists in the sense they don't really have a formalized organizational structure like a state.
This is why I talked to Lily Forrester about that. She actually knows people like who like fucking have contact with those people, and like she very specifically and explicitly said no. In fact, like they will select people who will be forced to serve in the government. They don't have liberal immigration policies, to put it in a way. They are very much anti-crime, anti-immigrant, insular society. So all of that combined with the existing thing of like they kicked out their cops and politicians, but that doesn't mean that they didn't replace them with like figures to serve the same purposes,
Well,
So,
they're organized like a whole lot of traditional indigenous type societies were
right.
organized. Like a lot of your primitivist anarchists and others will say, well, indigenous people, they were such great anarchists. If you define, it depends on how you're defining anarchism, but most of those cultures were basically gerontocracies. First of all, old people were, like the old guy is the boss because he's old. It's we see how well that works in our system, but so those systems were usually very gerontocracies. They were very insular in the sense that they did not like outsiders. Xenophobic, I guess, would be the modern term. They were also extremely patriarchal. Most of those kinds of cultures were a lot of them were very patriarchal. So very age oriented, very age centric, gerontocratic, very patriarchal, very xenophobic. But a lot of them didn't really have a formalized state apparatus, though. And Sharon is like that. Sharon is like is like a conservative indigenous society, but doesn't have a formalized state apparatus. Now the Zapatistas are more like actual leftists. Their system is sort of a quasi social democratic, quasi anarchistic type of system.
If you're using elders, I guess my question is then, in terms of anarchism, if you're utilizing wisdom of elders, which makes sense, like someone, well, as long as it's not people like Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or Trump, if you're utilizing the intelligence of elders who do have some vast experience and knowledge in certain areas, if you're utilizing them for arbitration, like I saw in Afghanistan, ANCAPs and they talk to ANCOMs, and people always ask, oh my God, well, Kareem, I guess, you could have anarchism in some areas, but you just need courts for law. And I think that's funny because I saw in Afghanistan, they would just have like an elder and he'd come in and it's literally in this dude's living room. And I guess that would be what I'd call arbitration. And you can do arbitration privately based on customary law. Like, okay, should I do this? Well, we have Sharia law here and says you shouldn't do that. And I'd even be fine like in Dearborn, Michigan, if they're like, okay, we want to do that. Okay, well, we want to do constitutional law. Well, okay, well, we want to do common law. And then you get somebody who you wouldn't have like a teenager doing arbitration because they don't know common law and it'd take a while to learn. But if you're just utilizing people who have experience for arbitration, I would still say that's anarchist, correct? Because you're just utilizing knowledge for arbitration, not for rulership.
Well, there are some. I know there are some indigenous cultures that had systems like that. Well, there's a dispute. We'll just find somebody and let them decide. It's like some random person, like a jury in our system. It's
yes.
I think in some of Colin Ward's books, he talks about that. It's one of the writers like that. I think it's Colin Ward. He discussed that. Yeah, well, you mentioned talking about Afghanistan. The Pashtuns are an example of what I was talking about earlier, in the sense that they're anarchistic in the sense of not really having a formal state system, but they're also very gerontocratic, very patriarchal, very religious, obviously. And many, if not most, indigenous cultures were kind of like that.
Well, see, and here's part of the problem. There's a clash between sort of a lot, not all, but a lot of modern primitivists and their original cultures. Because the original cultures, you had to survive a lot more, and it meant a lot more to survive to elderhood. Now, you've got elders who are on fucking government assistance and live their life under a cushy corporate umbrella. And, they've gotten to putter around their fucking retirement village golf courses and not actually care about how things impact the long term or how their tribe is going to be affected, because they're going to be protected by the hegemony that they, protected their whole life, and et cetera, et cetera. Retirement funds, 401k, we've got ours, fuck you. And so that's the mentality of a lot of these fucking boomers, and the reason a lot of people hate these fucking boomers. And so when you look at it through that lens, these people start to become much more of an active threat than they do an asset. Like, because if you talk to an elder previously, and that elder survived a long time because they knew how to effectively kill and build shit on their own, and hunt and gather, and how to organize a tribe in order to make sure that that happens, then if you talk to that person, you might get some wisdom. If you talk to some 65-year-old who's been living on social security and casino winnings for like 18 years, then like it's going to be less valuable. And that's where we are, like, or fucking just VA benefits, or a hefty pension from their policing, or they're a high officer in the church, so they get kickbacks off the communion plate, the donation plate. Like, there's so many examples I could bring up of just like people who have become cushed under this system, and that's how they got old. And now their advice as an elder is, fucking don't talk to me, stay off my lawn. And so those people are just the worst cunts, and they're oftentimes also the people who are responsible for the not in my backyard bullshit, the NIMBY garbage. They're the people who are like saying, oh, well, my community needs to be run a certain blah blah blah, and their way of like being an elder is to be a piece of shit. So
Yeah.
it's like a lot of the time that does exist. And the previous primitive societies, you might have had a lot of respect to the elders because they survived some real harsh shit. But now, I mean, if your version of being an elder is getting constantly drunk, microwaving yet another fucking TV dinner, and watching soaps all day, I don't care what you think. Go fuck yourself. So like it's one of those things where certain elders could be useful. And we have to be very selective in our understanding of which elders are and aren't, because like in the end run of it, in the end like scheme, a lot of these elders are elders because of the way that they are. And like because like they found a niche to settle into, they found a place to lay low, they found a way to do as little as possible in this modern society, and they've got it easy, and they had the easy life, and blah blah blah. And if that person wants to tell me that their experience is valuable, I'm going to tell them to go fuck themselves. So there is that, and then there's the fact that like if somebody does have experience, they could be experienced much more than that elder at like 35, 40, like because they actually went out and did shit, and that elder didn't. So it's like, even in this, like, primitivists have to like source their primitive wisdom in context, or they're going to lose the window in which that wisdom was valuable. Expert opinions, elder opinions, those don't fucking matter in the end if the reason somebody is old is because they sponged off bullshit until they fucking died. I don't care what that person has to say. They're useless to me. So
well, in our system, the ruling class has a much higher life expectancy than average people. Like, look at all these ruling class people.
Yeah, they won't freaking die.
Yeah, like Kissinger. Like Kissinger finally kicked off recently. He was 100. I think David Rockefeller died a few years ago. What was he, like 101 or something?
Uh-huh.
George Bush Sr., I think he was almost 100. Jimmy Carter, he's like 99 or something. But that's because they have, access to all the best doctors and surgery, life-preserving drugs, and who knows,
bodyguards.
Yeah,
bodyguards. Yeah, that's probably the one that keeps them alive.
Yeah.
Professional chefs.
Yeah.
No. Sorry, Rose.
Oh no, said they definitely need those.
We have the anarcho-transhumanists, though. We can put ourselves in.
Yeah, but those people are double cunted.
Immortal.
Huh?
Yeah, but those people are often double cunted.
Not Dylan Allman.
I mean, yes. Yes, they are.
But, well, yeah, Dylan Allman's cool. But I guess one thing, fine. Let's say, I'm not saying elders would serve as the primary function in every society. Maybe in a primitivist society, yes. But I think, like, if you go syndicalist, then yes, you have democratic unions. If you go to ANCAP man and ANCAP stand, then it's probably like just market forces. There's not like, and an arbitration would be done more like we have courts here. Robert Murphy, actually, if you look at him, I think he's really, really good. Dr. Robert Murphy, who's actually in the Twitter thread. He explains how probably what would happen is you would get private security, private police, private everything, and then you'd have private courts that would do arbitration, and I'd be fine with that too. If there's no good elders, if they're all eating TV dinners and drinking too much beer, then you go, okay, fine, I use a private court, which I think private courts in an anarcho-capitalist society would be a lot more fair.
Well, I always tell people this, like if you've ever used a service like, eBay or PayPal, you have used private arbitration. Like, for example, you buy something off of eBay, it doesn't arrive. You don't contact the state to get your money back. You contact PayPal. They, investigate. They determine, okay, the product was not sent or it was not as advertised, and they either give you back your money or they determine, you are lying and the person clearly has proof that they sent it. So again, you don't need the state involved in these sorts of arbitration matters.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I think, is in modern society you can have, I guess, if you want to call them companies, they're not private, but I guess in Murray Rothbard society, you have private companies that do arbitration, and I think that would work. I don't know how Samuel Conkin suggests to do law, because I haven't read him.
Personal insurance. He suggests everyone has their own personal insurance agent.
Yeah.
So you get scammed and you contact your insurance agent, and then they contact the person who scammed you. They contact that person's insurance agent, or you get same thing as you get injured or you get unjustly fired. Or it's an interesting concept because I think it could potentially work.
And also just to address some of these comments on Facebook, because I don't think Kareem checks those. Matt Peter Edelman says, what do you think about free trade? If it's actually free and not NAFTA and GATT and all these other neoliberal jack-off policies, if it's actually free, sure. But I don't think it is free most of the time that people use that labeling. I think they're jacking off. Have I seen Oppenheimer? No. Has anybody else? And also, everybody else can answer these.
Wait, so where are these coming from?
He's streaming on Facebook as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the Facebook.
I agree with Jeremy. What is usually called free trade, or is basically mercantilism, and it's dominated by these transnational cartels that are basically imposing their own terms of trade on everyone else. That's not. If somebody in America grows corn and wants to trade it to somebody who grows tomatoes in Mexico, fine, but that's free trade. But that's not what was commonly called free trade. That's not how that works.
Yeah, protectionist rackets. And also, just to be super clear, when we talk about these free trade arrangements, it's also part of the misnomer of the free market, where people get to, it's a double-edged wrong sword, where people get to simultaneously claim that every success of the Western world has been due to free market capitalism, and those people can go fuck themselves, because no, it in fact has not been free market capitalism. It has been state capitalism, as accurately put by both Bakunin and Rothbard. And two, not only is it not free markets, but it'd be great if it were free markets, but the people benefiting the most from these markets are the people who recognize the unfreedom and utilize it to its biggest extent. So it's a double-edged sort of wrongness, where people on both sides get to be doubly fucking wrong, because they get to claim either that and it's great because they get to say, oh, socialism, it's coming in and fucking everything up. But at the same time, they get to say that everything is awesome because of capitalism. Which the fuck one is it?
Right.
No, in fact, you can't have it both ways.
Vulgar libertarians, people who, they constantly, and you see this a lot with the newbie libertarians. It's not even necessary. It's not conscious. They just haven't gotten their ideology straight. One
and
moment
some of them are very stupid.
Capitalism is, and then the next they'll be talking about how unfree it is. It's dude, okay. Either we have a free market, which we don't, or we don't.
And we never have. Free markets have never existed. I'm all for free markets. Let's get those.
Not real. Yeah.
Right. Well,
they sort of do in the cracks between, the state, I think, if you've ever engaged in
Well, agorism.
Aid someone to water your garden for you. Like, okay, yeah, it's not completely free, but it's the closest approximation you can get. Like,
sure, it's a free or a market.
Yeah, or markets that are not yet regulated. For example, things where you don't yet need a license or some other stupid permission slip. So it actually does operate, based on supply and demand, and there's open competition. Like there are markets that are freer, at least.
Historically, what is called capitalism, or actually existing capitalism, the way it came about was one of two ways. Either the former aristocracy reinvented itself as a capitalist class as trade routes became more extensive, and then the merchant culture started to supplant the feudal agrarian culture. That was one way. That's what happened in Britain. Or the rising bourgeois class, which was like the upper middle class of the time. They simply confiscated the property of the classes that came before them. Like they confiscated property from the church, the aristocracy, royalty. Like if you look at the Soviet Union, for example, how did the Communist Party of the Soviet Union get its property, all the resources they control? Well, they confiscated it from whatever came before. Well, that's how capitalism came into being as well. They confiscated most of that from whatever came before as well and reinvented themselves as this kind of hegemonic merchant class. Right. And that's how real historic capitalism developed.
Right. Okay, that's my actual question, because here's the funny thing that happened again. So literally because of what happened with Aaron Bushnell, re-education. Huh?
With who?
With what happened with Aaron Bushnell, and there are people like, oh, he's dumb, just an idiot. And I was getting mad. So I retweeted re-education's thing, like, don't let this get you mad, let it or get you sad, let it radicalize you. And it has someone with a black and red flag, which is saying like pulling someone up. It's on my X or Twitter, whatever. And then Ben Heckman commented and said, why did you reshare this? And I said, why? What's wrong with it? It's like, this guy doesn't like ANCAPs because he made a joke. And then what's been happening is they kept making a gif of like, let me help you up, and then the guy's peeing on the other guy, and it's like really weird. And then I said, like, look, I'm for markets with sound money. I think that's a good idea, but I also think you can mix in exchange economies, skill share economies, and then have mutual aid to trade between both of them, and that's ideal. And then I think the thread on Twitter still going it says you can't be a capitalist and an anarchist. And I said, I'm not a capitalist. I'm a free market anarchist. So like, oh yeah, he's cool. And I'm like, I didn't really change the definition of what I believe. And literally I've been in syndicalist discords, and I'm just like, I'm a free market anarchist. They're like, oh yeah, you like free markets? Come on. I'm a capitalist. Oh, you're stupid. Put on a dunce cap. Get out of here. I've been called a neo-feudalist. I'm like, where am I close to a king anyway? Like, okay, yes, my grandfather was a politician, and my dad, tutored Gamal Abdel Nasser's son, but I am not anywhere close to like any ruling class anywhere. So how am I neo-feudalist? And they're like, well, because you're an ANCAP. I'm like, I like free markets and I'm an anarchist. They're like, oh yeah, come on in. Hey, here's what we're doing in syndicalist land today. I'm like, all I did was say I'm a free market anarchist. And I got to thinking about what you were saying and about what my friend Lizard says, which is, it's funny. If I go into a left-wing circle and I say I'm an ANCAP, it's like bad. But if I say, no, capitalism's bad, I'm a free market anarchist. I like mutual aid and flea markets and, selling lemonade or, making my own bread and stuff. They're like, you're cool. Come on in,
Yeah.
That's been my experience too, pretty much. I mean, I think it has to do with all of the very cringy people who call themselves ANCAPs more than actual, like, Rothbardian strain theory, honestly, because, yeah.
Well, and especially since a lot of people who claim ANCAP and Rothbard and Mises don't fucking read it!
Yes! Do you know how many times I've been called a commie because, like, I propose exactly what Rothbard proposed in his confiscation and the homestead principle essay?
Yeah, and like, okay, how about Justin Amash is now running for Senate again, he had this whole thing where he stood in front of a bunch of Libertarian Party Mises Caucus people and read Mises quotes. I posted a video of that.
In all fairness, he changed some wording around. Like, didn't he change the word anarchist at one point? Or I can't remember exactly.
I don't think he changed anything.
I mean, I saw that and I'm like, oh, you fucking idiots, because I knew exactly what he was doing. I'm like, he's reading Mises quotes and these fucking morons are gonna fall for it.
From a book called Liberalism, about how liberalism is fucking great, and now all these people are like, liberals bad because I like Republicans.
Wasn't he reading the quotes that Mises, wasn't he reading some quotes where Mises was criticizing anarchism? Because at the time, anarchism mostly referred to, the Anton types. So again, it was kind of deceptive. But anyone who's read anything would know what he was doing and not fall for it, but it was kind of deceptive.
Well, but the thing is, he wasn't being deceptive. These people are, when they say that they're Misesians. No,
well, they shouldn't have called it the Mises Caucus. I mean,
no, they shouldn't.
Okay, he was a classic liberal. He was not an anarchist.
I mean, okay, look, I get this a lot, and like I was getting in an argument with a prominent thinker. He was a very nice guy. He came on the podcast one time. His name is Dr. Richard Salzman. He teaches capitalism, and he's, I guess, an objectivist or an Indian. So me and him were discussing the ideas he had, because he said he says capitalism should have a state. And the issue I had is me and him kept going back and forth. And he said, well, Kareem, you're part of Mises Caucus, but Mises was an anarchist. And I said, look, Mises probably would have, if you could take a time machine and put Rothbard's ideas before Mises.
That's not a good argument.
It is. Here's the thing. The reason Mises didn't go anarchist is because there was no market anarchy variation at the time.
Sure.
You had in the American tradition, you had Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker and people like that.
Albert J. Nock, Rose Wilder Lane.
Those aren't market anarchists. Those are mutualists. So here's the problem. And if you want
in the European tradition, though, you had Gustav Molinari, Paul-Émile Dupuy,
Etienne de Betty. I always fuck up
they
that
weren't
name.
called anarchists, but like if you read them, a lot of people like what they're called kind of is more of a historical thing, like
context
considered
matters.
liberals, but
Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek and some of these Austrian economists that some libertarians are big fans of. All they were just John Stuart Mill classical liberals.
They were. Most of them were.
And except they came after the Austrian economic paradigm was developed. You didn't have that in John Stuart Mill's time. So if you take John Stuart Mill's utilitarian classical liberalism and then put on top of it like Eugen von Baerwerk and Joseph Schumpeter and all that kind of stuff, Karl Menger, that's Austrian economics. That's Mises and Hayek. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess my question, if I finally break it down, if Rothbard existed before Mises, I think Mises would have adopted an anarchist position similar to Rothbard, very similar to like a Kropotkin, Malatesta type thing.
Okay, I don't think
there were some later Austrian economists.
It's really hard to prove whether or not that would have been true. I don't know. We could only speculate.
Yes. And I think that in terms of like there were already people like
economists that were like late 20th century that came after those guys that were more anarchistic, like Gerard Radnitsky was one of them. There was another one, Anthony de Jay. They were in that tradition and that kind of European
Rothbard himself. Rothbard, I mean, he was heavily inspired by some of the early market anarchists, and then he merged basically Austrian econ with the early individualist anarchism,
right?
Because they got a lot right, such as why state money monopolies are bad. They just didn't fully understand how money and banking would work in a stateless society. So I mean, the addition of Austrian economic analysis to anarchist theory was definitely needed.
Yeah, I think so. Well, to me, honestly, I look at things in terms of scale. Like if you look at cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin came out as proof of work. Or if you look at, like somebody asked, I was in a syndicalist server and they asked, hey, Kareem, okay, how do you solve the Oasis problem with Rothbard's philosophy? And I actually sat there and thought about it. And I said, actually, I'd say you don't do that, because at Maslow's basic survival level needs, you need to socially cooperate. But once you socially cooperate enough where we're not starving, we have food overhead, things are working better, then you want to scale. How do you scale? Do you scale through market anarchy? So to me, really what Rothbard did in effect is help Kropotkin, Bakunin, all them with a scaling issue.
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, because that's always been my assessment of anarcho-communist theory in general. Like they got a ton right, but it doesn't. I just view it as kind of an incomplete ideology. It doesn't.
Well, like I was saying earlier, I tend to view it as more of a cultural difference, because those guys, the early anarcho-communists and others like that in that tradition, came from basically feudal societies. Yeah, they didn't come from a modern industrial technological society. That kind of thing was just in its very embryonic stages. It's something like Rothbard is multiple generations later. So it's in some ways I don't think you can really compare the thinkers from the pre-industrial or almost pre-industrial era to the post-industrial or when the industrialization was at its apex. That's the difference I see between, say, Kropotkin, Bakunin, Proudhon, all those figures, and then someone like Rothbard.
Also, like, there already were thinkers like that. Like, quite a few thinkers like Rothbard that existed, and Mises was aware of them. So Mises came to his own conclusions. I don't think he just needed the right guiding hand. I think that's a weird semi-infantilizing way to think of Mises. I think he came to his own conclusions based on his own experience, and I think we should take those the way they were. But like either way, the point is, to my point, and I've made this point so many fucking times, we should not be following people. We should be following ideas. We should be Rothbardians, Misesians, Hoppians. Fuck them all. Fuck them. Holy shit. We should not be them. We should be trying to follow ideas and trying to be a better idea follower. Because all these times when we are like trying to like, oh, what would Rothbard say? What would Hawkins say? We formed a new priest class. It sucks, asshole.
No, I'm not for that.
I should be able to criticize anyone I fucking want. Go ahead, Rose. Sorry.
I said, yeah, idol worship is cringe. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But
another thing about Mises is that Mises came from the aristocratic class in Austria, and if you were an aristocrat in the early 20th century in Europe, you didn't want to be identified with anarchists because they were the people trying to kill you.
Yeah, they want to burn everything to the ground.
Well, they would put a bullet in your head.
I mean,
okay.
Just a hobby. But the funny thing I get from Mises is he even though Mises is not an anarchist and he didn't identify as an anarchist, if you read his theories on Menger's theories of money, he calls it a quintessential praxeological means for the use of exchange. And then like he identifies that, he elucidates that, explains that as the importance of social cooperation. So for Mises, I think if you ask Mises, because someone even posted a Milei quote that said, well, you don't get out of debt through socialism. You get out of the debt with hard work and capitalism. And I said, okay, here's my question. If you keep digging a ditch constantly and that's hard work, right? Do you get any more richer? Not necessarily. And if you dig more ditches for people, does it necessarily get you richer? No.
Not when the post keeps shifting.
Yeah. What actually gets you richer is, in my opinion, whether you do exchange economies, mutual aid, whatever economy you do, the only thing that seems to create wealth is social cooperation. I have this skill or I have an opposing skill. When you combine different skills or you combine different sets of skills where there's scarcity, then that's what creates wealth. How does anarch unity exist? Well, because I have some money, and Jeremiah has some time, so we can exist that. Now, yes, I have some money, but there's other things like, okay, I can take, I can socially cooperate with Keith, be like, all right, come on the podcast. I get his knowledge. Then I can use that knowledge to go and unite people of seemingly different interests to go ahead and push for pan secession. And that, to me, is how you solve issues. So Mises might have not said, hey, I'm an anarchist. People in Somalia might have said, no, I'm not an anarchist. The Amish and Iran are not anarchists. But technically, they're saying at the core of their being, you need to voluntarily cooperate. And
that's not what a warlord says, no. Nor is it what somebody says who believes that we need a state and that people who don't agree are pulling at the fabric of like society and going to destroy everything.
Okay, fine. Forget the warlord, but like the Amish can socially cooperate, granted without technology, but that's actually impressive because most people can't. So my argument is fine. Mises didn't formally call himself an anarchist because anarchists are big, people labeled themselves semantically as anarchists are big, scary, but he would have said, well, you need to socially cooperate, and social cooperation is important for civilization, and that's why private order should emerge. Now, that's not technically that's Mises's, that's an analysis of Mises from another economist, but still, that economist makes sense. He's probably one of the best economists around Bob Murphy, so I'd say that makes sense. Also, I can add that sometimes labels and semantics get in the way of things, because if you were back in the Weimar Republic, nobody called themselves a Nazi. That was made up. They would have said, I'm a German National Socialist. I don't know what a Nazi is. So just because someone's not attributed to a term, just because you attribute a term to someone doesn't mean someone attributes that to themselves.
Here's the problem.
It's a semantic issue. Same with Mises calling himself an anarchist. Is that correct? Am I correct?
No, because Mises very specifically spoke in favor of a state.
Yeah.
And these warlords very specifically are forming a state. They're not fucking like just dumb to terms. They know what they were fucking saying, yo.
Okay, fine, but
I mean, Mises. I haven't read a lot of Mises. I read some of his core stuff, like.
You didn't read Human Action?
I read that like over 30 years ago.
Oh wow!
No, I read
2 years ago, and I feel like I've already forgotten lots of it.
Well, I read back when I first started finding out what libertarianism was. When I always knew about the Libertarian Party and all that. When I started finding out who all the key theoreticians and stuff were. I remember I started looking up some of the works of some of these people. This is before the internet. So I remember going to the university library and looking up Mises and Friedrich von Hayek and Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, and all these other people. Let's see, Mises, I read Human Action. Like everybody I knew that was into that scene, they always recommended Human Action, and they recommended the book on socialism. The one on socialism I thought
too
was
long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you can pretty much skip it, so I didn't bother. Like you can get all that from Human Action.
Well, the issue that I had when I read Mises, from what I recall at the time, was that I remember thinking that his whole argument basically amounted to central planning is inefficient. And I'm like, okay, I go along with that. So what? All right, case closed. I didn't really see that he was as great as a lot of people thought he was. I mean, maybe he was for his time, but I was just kind of like, who cares? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is very dated at this point.
But
like,
I do remember
people were influential, but they're dated.
I do remember in one of his books, though, he was talking specifically about anarchism, and he was saying that a liberal does not object to the person of the state. We are not anarchists. He said that that's something qualitatively different, and he definitely identified himself as a liberal and a utilitarian. I mean, he was a John Stuart Mill, utilitarian.
I mean, No, when I think liberal, that's kind of who I think of, instead
Yeah.
of the liberals of the day.
And Friedrich von Hayek was the same way, except he was more moderate. He was more like
Oh yeah, he made so many concessions to not just the welfare state, but he was okay with the idea of like an emergency state that could jump in and take power. And then, what does he do? He goes and supports the Pinochet regime because he had already decided that, you can have, a temporary state or a temporary dictatorship in times of emergency. I kind of use him as a cautionary tale against minarchism.
Yeah.
Well, Milton Friedman was the same way. Like, he was still alive when I was starting to get into all this stuff. And the thing is, it's like, I respect Milton Friedman for having been against the draft during the Vietnam War. And I respect Milton Friedman for having been against the war on drugs. But I never liked him much, though, because he was a supporter of Nixon and Reagan. And if you're an anarchist who came of age in the 70s and 80s like I did, those guys were like public enemy number one, Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. I mean, if you're an anarchist, you don't want to hear those names, I mean, even to this day, I cringe when I hear those names. It's like,
and Republicans should cringe, especially if they're against gun control. It's always fun to bring up that Ronald Reagan was in favor of handgun, shotgun, and rifle control. Fuck that piece of shit.
Nixon,
Yeah, and just real quick though, we've got some comments in the Facebook. So, first off, Samin Shaw says, "Haven't seen a live on Facebook in ages." So, hello. Also, the problem says the primary problem I have with the majority of anarchists is how they ostracize libertarians and look down on them, calling them statist, for example, which means by definition a person who supports a strong centralized authority over social and economic affairs. Anarchists want to share their ideals as superior morally, but at the same time mock and belittle anyone who disagrees with them, which drives me insane being an anarchist myself. It's shooting ourselves in the foot and blaming someone else for it. I pride myself on not reading anything and relying on my own intelligence and intuition to come to understanding rather than relying on external influences. Pretty much, it's a pretty good summary, although I would say statism meant something different when it was originally applied in the same way that capitalism did. So we should have more room for different definitions of statism.
I don't look down on libertarians. I mean, I use the term libertarian and anarchist interchangeably.
Yeah.
I'm trying to reclaim the term. Like, the idea that libertarian means minarchist, no, that's bullshit. It used to mean anarchist. It was the socially polite way of saying anarchist.
Well, also, like,
it's been kind of co-opted now, so I don't even know what to call myself with most people. Like, normally I don't call myself an anarchist when talking to normies because it, brings up, mental images of, figures clad all in black throwing Molotov cocktails through windows. But if I call myself a libertarian, then they're going to think I'm, some stupid, boring conservative because they've co-opted the term libertarian.
I change my terms all the time. So if I'm talking to Republicans and Democrats, I say I'm a libertarian. I believe in the non-aggression principle because they know what that means. And it's a lot because I'm knocking on doors. So I have a very short amount of time. I'm Libertarian Party. If I'm talking to syndicalists and comms, anything, I just say a free market anarchist.
Yes.
But if I'm in Mises circles, I just say, well, I guess now I'd say I'm an anarcho-pluralist, but I used to say I'm an ANCAP, like, or I'm a voluntarist. But I like the word voluntarist because it just means I believe in voluntary interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just call myself anarchist, and if people don't like it, fuck them. But like, I'm open to talking to minarchists and even full on, like, that definition status. I would rather talk to them and find out where they are and speak to them from where they are than just immediately treat them all like shit. Because I used to be one, and I know how to pull people out. Like, I was massively fashy in school, and I needed to get the fuck out of that. And the only way for me to do that was to be consistently told the right way by people who knew. So also,
I agree. Like, I have anarchist friends, and I agree. We shouldn't just, bully them because they're usually they're not far off. They just need to make that one final step.
Yeah. It depends. See, like, some anarchist friends I get along with, but I remember I was at an medical procedure rally. Let's call it that. And
come on. We said Molotov cocktails. Just say circumcision.
Yeah, sure. But that. And I was waving a Gadsden flag. This is around the pandemic. I said, "Hey, I'm from the Libertarian Party." He was a nice guy. He's like, "Oh, I'm from the Constitutionalist Party. Yeah, nice to meet you." And we started getting along. But then it came. He's like, "Well, if they just follow it," I'm like, "Sir, I don't think there's any possible way that you're going to get a group of psychopaths to follow it. Even if you get the ideal president, the CIA and the FBI aren't going to follow the Constitution." It's like, well, if they just follow. And then John Rasso was there, if you know him, and
I don't.
He was a LPMC guy. He's like, Kareem, like chill out with this. So sometimes it works really good. But funny enough, some of the most heated debates I've had are with minarchists because we're almost there. But then they're like, we just need a little bit. I will say, though, Robert Nozick does put some good. If we're going to, it's ironic. Who has the best criticisms of Marxism? People and comms, people on the left. Who has the best criticisms of right-wing, some right-wing ideology, right-wing anarchism? Well, Konkin had. Who has the best criticisms of Rothbard? Like Jack Lloyd, I like him, but he put up, well, when your ideology is so good, no one can criticize it. I said, well, Konkin had very good criticisms of Rothbard.
And so did a bunch of other people. Hey, myself included, like, don't unleash the cops.
Yeah, that was not good.
Oh, but we don't talk about late Rothbard.
Yeah, right.
And here's the thing about Rothbard, though. This is what I'd say about him. One thing you have to remember about Rothbard is that you have to take a lot of his writings on politics, not his abstract theoretical stuff, like where he's talking about, Austrian economic theory and natural rights and all that. But his writings on conventional politics, you have to take with a grain of salt, because he was always writing for a particular audience. He was always very strategically oriented. So he would adopt the rhetoric and language of whatever audience he was trying to reach at any particular time. Like if you go back and you read Rothbard's stuff from the mid to late 60s, he sounds almost like a Maoist or something. If you read some of that stuff, you'd think he was a communist. And then if you read his stuff from the early 90s during his paleo period, he sounds almost like a fascist. And then if you read his stuff from the 70s when he was with the LP, then he starts sounding like one of these like DC think tank libertarians, or almost like a liberal Republican or something. And if you go way back to like when he was younger, he sounds like somebody from the old right, I don't know, Robert Taft or someone like that. So it's a lot. The point is, I think he always said a lot of stuff he really didn't believe. He was trying to reach. Yeah,
and that doesn't say a lot of great things about him, though.
Yeah. I think Rothbard's a really good thinker. The only issue I have is Robert Nozick does bring up. I'll say this: Robert Nozick to me strikes me as a minarchist. That's if we're going to put labels. Right. Nozick's a minarchist, and he brings anarchy, utopia in the state. That there could be a predatory defense agency that because their services are so good, or they're the only monopoly, then they eventually do become the state. And I've always been like, hey, I have counter arguments to that. But then part of me is like, well, what if he's not wrong? And this is scary because here is the problem. Comcast, which I'm using now to talk to you guys, Xfinity, has a monopoly on high-speed internet where I'm at. Well, Verizon does. You can get Verizon, but it's prohibitively expensive. So the scary thing is, I have thought about that. Well, what if my preferred defense agents? What if this defense agency is just so good and so polite and so effective that all of a sudden this defense agency is number one? It's like, where are the other defense agencies? Now, people say the counter to that is citizens would resist them, which might be true.
Would they?
They don't now. I mean,
no. They don't now. So the only thing I would think to resist them, the only way actually to solve Robert Nozick's predatory state, I think, is to have anarcho-syndicalists, federations, and have private defense agencies and an
defense co-ops. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Defense co-ops.
John Stokes, who has a Unity profile picture, says it's I think I've said some words to him. I don't we're not friends though. Feel free to add me if any of you are out there, but John Stokes says it's unfortunate because anarchists and libertarians can be great allies against the coercion of the state. We disagree how far to go, but we agree on the direction, less government. Yeah. So all we need to do is it's like atheism, you just need to say you're atheist to all other religions, just that one,
You spend
Also,
time around these new atheists, though. That's like another church denomination. Just
oh yeah, I'm
yeah,
mostly
they managed to paradoxically turn atheism into a religion of its own. It's
I'm mostly being a cunt, but also yes, Matt, I am a Sonic fan, and thank you for the friend request. And also to your other comments, not even Ron Paul is perfect. Exactly, we can listen to these people, but we shouldn't follow them. And he also says, American government be like democratically elected socialist Chilean president bad, authoritarian Chilean dictator good. Yeah, basically.
Minnow shit.
So that's the whole point. I think because Kareem is over there yawning. We should wrap up soon.
I'm good.
Basically, the general vibe I think I want to give off these sorts of discussions. I think when people get too embedded in their fucking specific niche, they can't see outside that. So for instance, the Mises Caucus. They are all about Mises until you start quoting Mises. And one of the things that I could bring up, people say, oh, we're Austrian economists. Well, if you read Human Action, Mises didn't like the term economics, and he didn't like the idea of economics because the idea of everybody under one roof, under one household, considered the same interests and the same people is not how things operate. So he would say that he's not an economist, he's a catallactist. And people don't know what catallactics are, and I have to show them a fucking Wikipedia entry because they haven't read Mises.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's very much the same as Matt's previous comment here, where he said the biggest problem with Christianity is that too many Christians make Christianity less about Jesus and more about their own authoritarian agenda. It's like that, but with libertarian literature. And it's also like that with Christian literature. If you're going to, these people are manipulative a lot of the time. What they'll do is they will take the label of an ideology so that they can have their own viewpoints in the minds of listeners sanctified by taking that label. But then they will go directly against that label and bitch off and betray it. And so we have to avoid being those people, and we have to be serious and thorough about what we use, talk about, etc., or we're fucked, and we might as well just be the other people.
Okay. Being a member of Mises, I think there's a lot of good the Mises Caucus has done. Nick Sarwark had to go. If you saw what Nick Sarwark, look, not going to get a perfect world, but Nick Sarwark was literally tweeting we should have a discussion if we're going to go to war in Russia, like Elbow Macaroni wants to do now, because I guess the Rothschild banking, he said, Jacob Rothschild's in a fiery place now with the Zios. Maybe that's why I should be religious. But I think that there are some people who have said, questionable things, stuff I don't like. I disagree with Dave Smith on the border stuff. I like Dave Smith. I don't have a problem with him. I've met him, really cool dude. But I have disagreements with everybody in Mises. I think, though, the reason I became a pan-anarchist or a narco-pluralist was because even if I think the problem with the even Mises people is that just like the neocons think, well, I do believe there are people who believe this, if everybody got American-style democracy in the world, it would just be all hunky-dory. Even though it doesn't work here, even though we can't figure out our elections, well, you just need to send them some democracy, which I guess is the overt way of lying to say, hey, we want to steal their resources, but we need to invade them. So give me a nice thing so I don't look like Genghis Khan. Mm-hmm. But really, there's an issue that I think a lot of ANCAPs and ANCOMs think, they're guilty of this too, and I hear this all the time. I think it's one of the main problems in anarchy. My form of anarchism is the only anarchism, and Mark Passio does this too. Natural law is the only form of anarchism. Anarcho-primitivism is the only form of it. You know, where syndicalism is the only form of anarchism. If you talk to some syndicalists, and
we have to avoid being campists.
Yeah. So I'm like, look, listen. I actually think Keith is right because he considers all the different variations of anarchism. And I'm not going to live like John Zerzan, even if the state's gone. And John Zerzan is not going to agree with me
on the amount of technology I'm using. Literally, I'm using a ridiculous amount. I have like laptops stacked on top of laptops here, but I won't put them inside me. So maybe the transhumanists disagree with me too. And I like solar punk. And to be fair, I like communal aspects of existence, and I like the idea of mutual aid. And I also like free markets. So I think to take all those in consideration, decentralization, just as there's 8 billion people, would have 8 billion, could have potentially, just like religion, 8 billion forms and 8 different practices. And to say this is the only right way is ridiculous. I think people are doing this now with everything. Carnivore is the only way to eat. Vegan's the only way to go.
People need a tribe. People are tribalistic.
Yeah. Don't be campist.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm very non-campus. The only time I'm campus is if I see that there's a deliberate a blatant misjustice happening. It's like,
well, right. For
like,
instance,
okay,
I
are you
will be a campus
Palestine? Yeah, I'm pro-Palestine because I can see an overt wrong there. Russia and Ukraine, even, I didn't really take a side. I'm just like,
I see it as a heel versus heel match.
Yeah, but Palestine, I can say, like, look, there's clearly one side that this is an asymmetric warfare thing. It's not like these guys are threatened, and I don't think that there's any good argument that I've heard that or any. I don't think there's any argument that that has been even slightly convincing of the Likud or Zionism or anything. Michael Rapport going on TikTok saying I can't find the apartheid for 10 seconds on TikTok is not, or saying, oh, Assad did bad things. Yes, he did. I said stuff about that. Oh, well, something bad happened here. Yes, it did. You didn't protest that. Yeah, I was against that too. You didn't say anything about Iraq. I said something about Iraq too. But I actually think this is just overt. It's interesting that Aaron Bushnell said, like, what would you do at this time? This, and you're doing it right now. So in honor of that and what happened with the flower thing, I'm going to go take my lunch break tomorrow in Pittsburgh and go to a march before one of my gigs, and it should be good.
Very cool.
Well, that's kind of how I approach it. I mean, I'm more interested in meta politics than I am in topical issues. Like, I don't really care what somebody thinks about veganism. I don't really care about abortion or any of those kinds of topics.
Yeah, me neither.
I can offer opinions on it, but if somebody doesn't agree with me, that's fine. When it comes to topical issues, I'm really only interested in emergencies. Like Gaza is one. The Vietnam War was one. That every generation there's usually some emergency issue going on that's critically important. But it's like most of this other stuff is just people fragmenting into different tribes, where it's just like their issue is their tribal identity. Like, instead of having like these ethno tribes like the Vandals or something like that, or the Native American tribes, now instead you're on the vegan team, or you're on the pro-life team, or you're on the Donald Trump team or something like that. I mean, and it's and I think a lot of that is just people looking for something to belong to, because it's like we don't really have the common civic culture anymore.
People are tribal.
They're looking for something easy to belong to is the real problem, and that brings me back to Kant's comment earlier. Conscious ideology is more disconnected from the actions of the structures of society when it comes to those on top at times. There can be disagreement among the rulers with the structure, but the structure remains the same. And like, that's the thing. They have us fighting over all these stupid little issues with nothing actually changing remarkably. And like Kant also went on to say, focusing on the aesthetics and cult of personality rather than straight up action And it becomes a spectacle, not a thing of consistency and action, thought, just entertainment. Ideology becomes in-group identification. Aesthetics play an important part, helps gets the emotions riled up. Emotional appeals for the aesthetics, beliefs become add-ons until they become dogma for the people who join thanks to the aesthetics. Yeah, it's just about performative bullshit. They don't actually care about these issues. They care about like their sunk cost fallacies and feeling right and appearing moral in front of people who are going to give them applause and money. They don't give a shit. It's not, and so people will fight along these arbitrary lines, and in the morning it's just dumb bullshit to them. They're not actually committed to the cause. It doesn't matter. They're fighting each other based on these bullshits, and the fucking state loves that shit because their energy is all pulled into that. And JC says the dissident right, quote unquote, niche podcast circuit is grabbing their ankles that Peter Thiel wants to take over the system. The right in general is embarrassingly easy to psyop. They see groups like Patriot Front and can't comprehend how they aren't Fed infiltrated, if not a full-blown honeypot. They have to believe in these silly groups because their ideology relies on centralized power not being inherently flawed and susceptible to corruption. Yeah, exactly. Both JC and Kant are on the money with those. It's bullshit campism because it's easy. These people it's like entry-level politics. Are you pro-choice or pro-life? I'm pro get the cops disarmed. I'm pro fucking remove military bases from the Middle East and stop enabling Israel's strategic weapons stockpile. I'm pro, fucking pull the mega corporations out of the natural resources. I'm pro get the fucking like death machine ground to a halt. And I think that makes me more pro-life than you, because the issues you care about probably fucking contribute to that shit. Like, that's the thing. It's surface level. It doesn't matter, and it's got us fighting, and it's blowing our energy on useless garbage. That's the real shit, and they love that shit. The state loves that shit.
Yeah, because they don't want you to talk about, like, I don't see any coverage for Aaron Bushnell. I don't see it. Why? Because that's actually a major issue. Oh, because then people might start to say, oh, okay, there's something going on. But they'll talk about, like, oh, this celebrity did this or this guy did
be fighting over whether or not, who uses which bathrooms, whether or not people have pronouns in their bios or on their resumes.
The wokes are the real problem. You're just a liberal triggered.
Yeah, my wokes. Yeah, that's the thing.
I'm gonna go argue with 18 college students and pretend I won a debate circuit. Fuck you, piece of shit.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro is literally one of the worst political.
Look, there's a reason why there's a market for the anti-woke shit, though. Like, I mean, I can't stand the anti-woke shit, but like, okay, so for those of us who came to anarchism from the left, or rather came back to anarchism, like, okay, so when, like, it was during the 2010s when politically, like, PC culture, that sort of extreme political correctness, the divisiveness first started, becoming an issue. Whereas, the left had, been formerly very pro, free speech. Suddenly, you have people saying, no, you shouldn't be allowed to speak your mind. You actually had people calling for, the abolition of the First Amendment. I think a lot of people who had been on the left previously went through a reactionary phase where they were drawn to these anti-woke people because they're like, what happened? I was with these people, and then all of a sudden they're yelling at me because I have a slightly different opinion on something, or because we're not exactly on the same page. So I guess what I'm getting at here is, people are driven towards, the anti-woke or even alt-right circles because they feel betrayed by the communities that they thought they were part of.
Yeah. It's like people are like, aren't you mad at Roe v. Wade? I'm like, I really don't care. It's like, aren't you mad at this? Aren't you mad at that? It's like people like get mad at the silliest things, like, okay, someone said this, or someone, this celebrity did this, or this guy, someone made fun of, Biden or Trump or whatever. Just like, I don't care. But it's like, hey, there's an actual situation in Gaza. It's like, oh, well, it's complex. I don't really want to comment on it. I'm like,
it's not complex. It's very clear what's going on. It's very clear that one group has asymmetric power over the other, and it's very clear that one group has land grabbed, and it's very clear that one group is using excessive force on people who do not have the ability to use excessive force back. And that's the biggest thing. So by that, I think that's the thing that really gets me. It's just, out of all the issues that we could do something. I mean, the Egyptian Air Force props, actually, I'm starting to see like they dropped some aid. There was a confrontation on the border. So I'm hoping. So I asked my dad, like, hey, I have citizenship there. I go back and cause problems with CC. He's like, no, they don't have free speech there, so don't do it. So, but yeah.
Well, anyway, I think that's a reasonable place to like call it, because everybody seems fucking exhausted.
Yes. I'm an ANCAP man, an ANCAP fan.
But anyone like the real shit is we need to unite on what like we have in common and realize how much of it there is. Like, there is so much that we could like get hands on deck for, and we're spending all of our energy pointing our barrels at each other rather than pointing them at the ivory towers, and that's the reason they stay standing.
All right, well, let's take them down. I really feel if you hit central banking, whether you do Skillshare economy, whether you have vouchers, whether you have a Zapatista thingy, whether you have ANCAPstan or Agoristan or your private security thing, if you take out central banking,
well, that's what powers the war machine. That's what
that would take out the ruling class. The ruling class can't do much without central banking, in my opinion. Maybe they can issue threats. Maybe they can still have command over some order followers. Like, I don't doubt that, without central banking, they could still use scary things like Delta Force and the CIA, but they would not have wide range to do that much.
Well, I think
they have the perpetual warfare state.
Yeah, a key, I think, is to identify a topic that most anarchists and other adjacent radicals would agree on, and something that might actually be popular among at least some normies, and then something that the ruling class cannot effectively co-opt without severely undermining their own interests. Like most issues, the ruling class can co-opt pretty easily, but central banking is one. They can't say you can't co-opt in the Fed or drop central banking altogether. That's either you're for that or you're against it. You could co-opt pro-life, you can co-opt pro-choice, you can co-opt gay rights, you can co-opt environmentalism for the most part. Maybe not the primitivist kind, but yeah, say you want to abolish the banking cartels. That's striking at the heart of ruling class power.
Yeah, the warfare, also the welfare state, I think, is the thing, because everybody wants. Republicans are like, we're against welfare. It's like, oh wait, but BB wants some more money to fight people. Like, oh well,
they still want welfare. They just don't want welfare for poor people.
Well, the banking cartels are the modern version of the royal dynasties. Being against the banking cartels today is like being against the royal families in the Middle Ages. All right, so you can't. But in the Middle Ages, you couldn't. If you were a royalty, you couldn't co-opt anti-royalism. Either the king's going to exist or he's not. And the financial oligarchs are the modern equivalent of that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the two big things that libertarians, anarchists, people who could do something would be to oppose NATO, to oppose BRICS, and to oppose what's going on in Gaza right now, and also to oppose any escalations or anything going on in the Russia-Ukraine thing. Like I heard Elbow Macaroni is like, well, if Ukraine can't win, then we'll send Frenchies to go. Like, who are you going to send to go fight? I bet the French military sucks. Like, the Yellow Jackets are cool, but and the GIN is but like, I was looking at that today. I'm like, NATO would get wiped out. So without America, and
I think that's really ridiculous. So I think if anarchists are going to fight for anything, it should be against central banking, genocide, and also escalations of regional conflicts.
That's what I've been saying. Yeah.
Although I've known some anarchists, particularly the left-wing kind, that are so anti-Russian, they're almost neocons. Or
True. Yes. You mean like the fake ones? Yeah.
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 Well,
And
some that's a matter of perspective too. Like some of them really are Eastern Europeans, or they're from that, so they have reasons to be anti-Russian.
I get it. Like, I'm not like a fan of, I can understand not being for Putin. But here's and I've also seen people in Mises, or there are a select few of people, anarchists, who are like, well, Kareem, like, well, even a guy I brought into Mises one day said, we should team up with Putin. He shares our values. I'm like, oh, no, but, and I said, okay, I'll grant you this. You can team up with Putin. I'll team up with Antifa because they share my values. And he's like, whoa.
If only they weren't impossible to reason with. I mean, have you ever dealt with a group of wild Antifas?
There's Antifas in my server, in Mad Liberty server.
Oh.
They're not that bad.
Online, yes. When you deal with one or two of them, yes. I'm talking about a mob of them.
You know what?
Like,
I honestly think if they know you and they know, like, hey, he's a good guy. You know what? I don't know. To be
if
fair,
they know you, yes. If they don't know you, you're their enemy. And I would not try to approach, they protested Dave Smith in Rochester. I was there.
I'll tell you what, a lot of the
of course, I couldn't resist yelling.
I'll tell you what. I'll get a Bro Popkin shirt, and they'll be like, hey, and I'll be like, hey.
Well, what Antifa remind me of is in the 80s, when I was in the left anarchist scene, then there were the neo-Nazi skinheads back then. Yeah. And the Antifa today are a lot like the skinheads in the sense that they travel in large groups. They're usually these fairly small, emaciated-looking people, but they travel in small groups, and then they don't fight unless they outnumber their opponents.
Well, yeah, they're only dangerous in groups. Like, they won't attack unless they're in groups of 5 or more. It's always
and that's exactly how the skinheads were. That's exactly how they were. But where the Antifa came from, though, is a lot of people think they have their roots in German anti-fascism of the interwar period. That's not true. The modern Antifa, American Antifa, come out of the punk culture, and it's basically they were basically the anti-Nazi skinheads. It's like you had the skinheads.
It used to be part of the punk scene. Like, what the hell happened?
I know we're going on 3 hours, but my understanding was in response to Francisco Franco, the CNT already, I don't know how you pronounce them, in response to Franco's regime, which Franco, people on Twitter who say Franco is based, I really question what reality they live in. But Francisco Franco, to his overt fascism, and also Mussolini, my understanding is groups of people I forget the name of the army. It's not Nestor Makhno's army. It's not the Black Army, but the
Durruti column.
Huh?
The Durruti column. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes, the anti-fascists started by fighting Francisco Franco. They didn't win, but I'm sure they put a dent in it. Now, funny enough,
well, you had a big militia confederation in Spain. They were just called the anti-fascist militias. But they had these anarchist guerrilla groups that were part of that. Like the Durruti column was one. There was a guy named Durruti who was a big anarchist guerrilla fighter. But in the time when fascist movements were a big thing, and then you actually had fascist countries like Italy and Germany. Yeah, you had anti-fascism was a serious thing. I mean, you had some of the Antifa flags that they use today. They lifted from the interwar period anti-fascists, like the German anti-fascists. Yeah. But that was a different situation. I mean, it has different cultural roots, although it's been appropriate. It's cultural appropriation.
Yeah. Correct. But just to give you my background, Keith, and then we can wrap it up. Definitely 3 hours. Thanks for being. But to actually what happened, when I was real young, we're talking about late 90s, early 2000s. I used to talk to my friend, and then I liked a band called Sum 41, like 182. Then we had arguments. I said Sum 41's better than, I forget, it was NoFX. And they said, Kareem, why don't you come to a concert with us? It's a place called the Rally Alley. There's a band, Black Flag, playing, and they're against the government.
I'm literally like 8 or 9 at the time. I'm like, that's bad. We pledged to the government. Why are you doing this? He's like, Kareem, come on. I'm like, Mom and Dad, like, they're like, oh, you're hanging out with these friends again. I'm like, I got to be with the cool kids. And then they took me to this place called the Rally Alley. And then I saw the casualties. Then I saw then they gave me the Exploited. Then they showed me SLC Punk. And I'm like, then I found Crass and Rage Against the Machine. I'm like, Dad, I'm an anarchist. He's like, you're 11 or 12. I'm like, I want to fight the government. I was printing out lyrics. He's like, Kareem, you're printing out stuff from the Exploited singer. Are you unemployed? Are you going to fight the like? And I printed out. This album really hit me, and it still does. It still stays with me. There was a punk band called Crass with Penny Rumbard and Steve Ignorant, and they had a sign and they had a thing. Now, not against Christianity, but they had an interesting argument saying, why did you live your life in accordance to the state or Jesus or anything like that? Live your own life. Do it yourself. The only authority is yourself. And I'm like 13 trying to figure out what this means. So I listened to an album which was about their outrage. If you're familiar with the Falklands War, they were very pissed off at that. And it's like a black metal album. It's a lot of noise, but they have some interesting concepts in saying like, They have a little parody. If there was no government, well, wouldn't there be chaos? Everybody running around setting petrol bombs off. Like there was a lot of ideas coming out of there that just said, hey, that Dalhouse is the way that we can live without the state. And their most prominent saying was, the nature of your oppression is the aesthetic of our anger, meaning our art will manifest based on your anger. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Crass or anything like that or not, but that got me to say I'm an anarchist. The problem is a lot of my punk friends OD, like Steve-O, the issue thing, or they got out of it. And then I was sitting there, I'm like, I'm still a punk at heart. And then I did some Google. Then I had one of my friends, he's like, Kareem, I'm a libertarian. This is before Mises. So sitting on like a Google Hangout with Gary Johnson, asking questions about Chris Christie. And you know what? Gary Johnson was very easy to talk to. But then I remember that friend who was in the Libertarian Party called me up one day and said, Kareem, you gotta, I said, I want to be an anarchist, but they're all left wing. And this kind of sucks because they're all telling me to like get out there and run and do this. I want to sit home and play video games all day, but still be an anarchist and have my Bitcoin on my computer. Why don't anarchists like technology? Why can't I just have fun and play computer games? I'm like, if I could be an anarchist with technology and the market, that'd be great. And then someone showed me Adam Kokesh. I'm like, I'm an ANCAP. That's the best thing ever. But then I saw how ANCAPs have devolved now, and that's why I myself an ANCAP. Long story short, I'm still with the punk culture. Like a lot of people like said, Kareem has gone left. I haven't gone left. I started left. I started because of Penny Rumbard's writings about the only authority is yourself. And they also had, very good stuff about Hiroshima, about what happened to the natives. I like the Exploited talking about the Exploited is a band out of Scotland, Waddy still has familiar with them. And I found out they're pro-Palestinian. So he's like,
The Exploited?
Huh?
The Exploited?
Yes. Yeah.
That's an old band. They played a show at a club here probably 35 years ago. And I remember that the skinheads did a protest against it because they were anti-American or something like that.
Yeah, they do have a song F the USA, but I'm like, look, they do have a point. This ain't the land of milk and honey because all they want is money, money, money. And they said like they'll kill you when you die, your body reeks. So I've played that, and people get mad. Like sometimes I do like to piss people off. So like honestly, I think it's still relevant. If you listen to a Christian Zionist and you play a song called "The American Jesus" by Bad Religion, that signifies them to a T. People get mad. They're like, "Oh, isn't Bad Religion against Jesus?" I'm like, "No, it's against the conservative Christian concept, one nation under God." And George Carlin said, like, why would God have a favorite country? Isn't that against his teachings? And why would it be America?
Yeah, and like, if you want a song like that, I showed this to Kareem the other day, Slaughterhouse by Motionless in White, where there's this is the line that he really liked, and it's like it's talking directly to the gerontocracy. You tell your stories of the things that you've been through, but they're as false as the teeth that you lie through. Nobody's buying, but you sell, sell, sell. In the land of the free, you're a slave to your wealth.
Speaking of crass, when I was and early on when I got into the anarchist scene, for a while I had this. I was living with a group of anarchists, but there was this kid that was staying with us. He was like a runaway. He was a teenager. He was like a runaway, but he was like a vegan skinhead, non-racist skinhead. But his favorite band was Crass. I remember he had a Crass album and played it for me, and I'm like, that's the worst album I've ever heard. That sucks. And he was explaining it to me. I'm like, yeah, it's a cool concept. It's still a shitty band.
Their idea was that, hey, we're going to go completely DIY. Like, I don't think they ever sold out. They have a very cool song called Banned from the Roxy. And they said, defense, shit, it's nothing less than war. And nobody what the government knows what the fuck it's for. So they had a lot of really, there's also another one they had, Where Next Columbus. And if you listen to that, it's not about Columbus. It's about, well, Young had this idea, but this, Sartre had this idea. Mussolini had this idea, even Jesus. But if you keep following people, who's going to lead you to save you and who's going to lead you off a cliff? So I guess their message was, hey, do it yourself. You don't need the state. You don't need anything else. You got the anarchist commune, work with that. So I don't know. I liked, to be fair, I liked Crass because of the ideas, but I still like the music. I don't know. It woke me up.
Yeah, well, a band I had an experience like that with was the Dead Kennedys. Like I remember,
I love them.
They were contemporary, when I was young, and I remember seeing one of their albums in a store, and they had the lyrics printed on the album, and I was like, well, these are pretty cool lyrics, it's like all this anti-government, anti-religion, all that kind of stuff. And I bought the album and took it home and played it. I'm like, well, this sucks. They were really good.
Well, it's funny. I like Hardinng.
Some of these bands are kind of like an acquired taste, I feel like. But I miss the little lyric booklets. Like, I can't be the only one who had like lyrics plastered all over my wall when I was a teenager.
I did. I printed them all out. I actually printed. I wanted to understand because I knew that wasn't his name. I'm like, okay, Jello's a mass-produced food. What is Bafria? Oh, wait, that was a secessionist state from Nigeria that Nigeria intentionally starved.
Yeah.
So his name is clever. He's taking a mass-produced food product and the, I guess that would be a genocide in Bafria and combine the two.
Yeah.
I also like kill the poor because that really still hits like like the Hillary Clinton neoliberal types are like, I want to help the working class. It's like, do you really? No, just get rid of them.
I met Jello Biafra once.
Really?
You ever heard of the band Guar?
Yes.
Yeah, those guys were friends of mine. But
really?
Well, we're from the same city. Yeah. In fact, the Guar guys were some of the original ones. Were some of the first people I met when I came here. But but I went to a Gore party once, and Jello was there, so I met him briefly.
Yeah, Jello cool dude.
Yeah, he's all right. He's kind of, he's got lead singer disease, but he's all right. He was all right when I met him. That was some time ago.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think like a lot of a lot of people get like rock star, syndrome. But I like Jello's Stars and Stripes of Corruption. I like a lot of what he has to say. But then these people tend to, I've seen a lot of punks, unfortunately, especially in the rise of 2020. Like, hey man, vote for the Democrats. I'm like, no, this is not the point. Hey,
don't vote blue no matter who.
That's not new. That's not new. There were people like that one years ago.
Yeah, true.
I knew punks and hippies and all that back in the day that said, "Well, we really got to vote for. We got to vote for. We really got to vote for Michael Dukakis because George Bush Sr. is a Nazi. It's."
It's so annoying. And also, even though I like him, he's a great guitarist. But like Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine is, in my opinion, authoritarian communist.
I've just never really liked Rage Against the Machine. I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say. I just always found them kind of overrated.
I like System of a Down as well.
I like all these bands because I'm pulling what's good from them. Like, and Rage Against the Machine, to be honest, they're right a lot. And if you want an education in why leftists believe the things they do, you should listen to Rage. You should listen to Immortal Technique. You should listen to Flowbots. You should listen to Rise Against. There's a lot of like lefty bands that are very good at describing the leftist position, and you can learn from them. And to me, I would rather do that, and I would rather be like, we don't have to fully agree for me to get why you're mad and fight alongside you.
Yep. So I'm gonna leave it there. That was a good one. All right, guys. That was the Essential Libertarians giving you a lot of tools. Long stream, 3.5 hours for self-governance. I will catch you in the next one. I want to thank Insanity is Free from Anarch Unity and Free Thought Project. And also Agnex, Keith Preston from Attack the System, and Rose. We're both from the LPMC. All right. Thank you, guys. And have a good one.